finally be recognized for my lifelong dream of being a horrible, terrible woman who does shitty shit. I'm really growing into my mother's skin in the worst way possible. Feels good, man. This is the mommy issues clubhouse. You can't come in unless you have the mommy issues. You really are like an icon of the mommy issues subculture, as it were, which I think, honestly, might have been what pulled me in the very beginning. I was like, I see you. I see what you're doing. She of the Fourlung, Duchess of the Mom Problems, Matriarch of Piss? I don't know. I hope I can one day make enough money to sponsor you both going to clown school.
Hello from the gutters of New York City, which are filled with dog manure, vomit, stale wine, urine, and blood. I am still here, like a spirit roaming the night, thirsty.
Hey yo, pump up the jam, it's the summer of Sam. I got a pen in my hand, scribbling a pentagram. I'm the founding forefather, Masonic book author, midnight marauder that's harder than Sergeant Slaughter. Classic novelist, Frank Miller, serial killer, drive tanks to your metropolis. I simply think iller. My cold flows make you shiver like zombies in Thriller. Mike Jack move, we demigod silly, all thicker than Zorro. Mickey Santoro, prime sharpen up the splitter man at his torso. Operation Omega, searching every bodega, looking for the dough, raking demigod toe takers. Boy, big motive, CCP, flow daily, poison, BBD. Fall for Mike Bivens, the gods, strike living. Might run up in your crib, the bomb with night vision. It's just so pull the trigger tight, my friend, and them bullets will go right to your shit. Malfunction, cause I modified the firing pin. Sabotage anybody who can spy the win. I'm sniping them in. My mama called me Ryan again. The son of Randall when Sam is my Siamese twin. We brother gripping in summer, banana clips if you slipping. I put that 100-round drum in and light your house up like Christmas. You can see the city burning, you smell the smoke. See me rocking a mask like a lucha libre. Woke up during your set. Night fight, chest blocks, black and white squares. Those spears that sharper than Rothstein and his Sanjans. New school, fake thugs, squealing like old stairs. I throw slugs that are into careers. I'm reinventing the category for rappers and category. I'm all heart, Tony Stark, advanced in my laboratory. You're finding me smack dab right next to a black lab. They're saying it ain't so killable. I put him in trash bags. Reverse my spit, I'm trying to murder shit. To the summer miles like I'm David Berkowitz. Listen, I'm on a mission of filling that void missing. Cause any track I touch needing a mortician. Jealousy and envy lurk, so since I might be shot, my car got bulletproof glass like a Chinese spot. Me and Sheila feeling sharing it to share it. You might say holding a crown, but I'm wearing it. Yeah, you can't sell it for freedom fighters and terrorists. Cause my closet kinda resembles T.I. Harris's. Choppers on the floor, cash stuffed and Louis luggage. So I ain't even gotta act tough, the Uzi does it. Run around with a gun in my hand, so just open it. Just open it. Just open it. Just open it up. Run around 44 my hands, so just open it. Just open it. Just open it. Just open it up.
There was a surreal feeling about it. We're finally putting a face to horror and terror.
Hello and welcome to Part 3 of Featured Fiction with Fourlung. Tonight we've got two stories, one by Stephen King and one by Peter Straub. If you are here for the first time, welcome! We listen to freaky, creepy, yucky stories written by people. That's right, we listen to what some people might call classic horror fiction. Mostly stuff published between the 1970s and the late 90s, early 2000s. Tonight's first story is about an hour and 10 minutes long. The second one is about an hour and 20 minutes long. And as usual, we will have a 10-minute intermission in between our stories, so look forward to that. Our first story tonight is called Chattery Teeth, and it is written by Stephen King, originally from the 1993 short fiction collection called Nightmares and Dreamscapes. I ripped this story myself from an old audio cassette, so I apologize in advance to headphone wearers for any weird background feedback or other audio weirdness that you might detect. I tried my best to make it sound as clean as possible with an equalizer after the rip, but in case it wasn't obvious from the messy and highly juvenile way that I mix all of my music, I am not an audio engineer, and I never will be.
Chattery Teeth by Stephen King, read by Kathy Bates. Looking into the display case was like looking through a dirty pane of glass into the middle third of his boyhood, those years from 7 to 14 when he had been fascinated by stuff like this. Hogan leaned closer, forgetting the rising whine of the wind outside and the gritty spick-spack sound of sand hitting the windows. The case was full of fabulous junk, most of it undoubtedly made in Taiwan and Korea, but there was no doubt at all about the pick of the litter. They were the largest chattery teeth he'd ever seen. They were also the only ones he'd ever seen with feet, big orange cartoon shoes with white spats, a real scream. Hogan looked up at the fat woman behind the counter. She was wearing a t-shirt that said, "Nevada is God's country" on top, the words swelling and receding across her enormous breasts, and about an acre of jeans on the bottom. She was selling a pack of cigarettes to a pallid young man whose long blonde hair had been tied back in a ponytail with a sneaker shoelace. The young man, who had the face of an intelligent rat, was paying in small change, counting it laboriously out of a grimy hand. "Pardon me, ma'am?" Hogan asked. She looked at him briefly, and then the back door banged open. A skinny man wearing a bandana over his mouth and nose came in. The wind swirled desert grit around him in a cyclone and rattled the pin-up cutie on the Valvoline calendar thumbtacked to the wall. The newcomer was pulling a handcart. 3 wire mesh cages were stacked on it. There was a tarantula in the one on top. In the cages below it were a pair of rattlesnakes. They were coiling rapidly back and forth and shaking their rattles in agitation. "Shut the damn door, Scooter. Was you born in a barn?" the woman behind the counter bawled. He glanced at her briefly, eyes red and irritated from the blowing sand. "Give me a chance, woman. Can't you see I got my hands full here? Ain't you got eyes? Christ." He reached over the dolly and slammed the door. The dancing sand fell dead to the floor, and he pulled the dolly toward the storeroom at the back, still muttering. "That the last of 'em?" the woman asked. "Oh, but Wolf." He pronounced Wolf, woof. "I'm gonna stick him in the lean-to back of the gas pumps." "You ain't not," the big woman retorted. "Wolf's our star attraction, in case you forgot. You get him in here. Radio says this is gonna get worse before it gets better. A lot worse." "Just who do you think you're fooling?" The skinny man, her husband, Hogan supposed, stood looking at her with a kind of weary truculence, his hands on his hips. "Damn thing ain't nothing but a Minnesota coy dog, as anyone who took more'n half a look could plainly see." The wind gusted, moaning along the eaves of Scooter's grocery and roadside zoo, throwing sheaves of dry sand against the windows. It was getting worse, and Hogan could only hope he would be able to drive out of it. He had promised Lita and Jack he'd be home by 7, 8 at the latest, and he was a man who liked to keep his promises. "Just take care of him," the big woman said, and turned irritably back to the rat-faced boy. "Ma'am?" Hogan said again. "Just a minute. Hold your water," Mrs. Scooter said. She spoke with the air of one who is all but drowning in impatient customers, although Hogan and the rat-faced boy were in fact the only ones present. "You're dime short, Sonny Jim," she told the blond kid, after a quick glance at the coins on the countertop. The boy regarded her with wide, innocent eyes. "I don't suppose you trust me for it." "I doubt if the Pope of Rome smokes Merit 100s, but if he did, I wouldn't trust him for it." The look of wide-eyed innocence disappeared. The rat-faced boy looked at her with an expression of sullen dislike for a moment. This expression looked much more at home on the kid's face, Hogan thought. and then slowly began to investigate his pockets again. Just forget it and get out of here, Hogan thought. You'll never make it to L.A. by 8 if you don't get moving, windstorm or no windstorm. This is one of those places that have only 2 speeds, slow and stop. You got your gas and paid for it, so just count yourself ahead of the game and get back on the road before the storm gets any worse. He almost followed his left brain's good advice. And then he looked at the Chattery teeth in the display case again. The Chattery teeth standing there on those big orange cartoon shoes, and white spats. They were the real killer. Jack would love 'em, his right brain told him. And tell the truth, Bill, old buddy. If it turns out Jack doesn't want 'em, you do. You may see another set of jumbo Chattery teeth at some point in your life. Anything's possible. But ones that also walk on big orange feet? I really doubt it. It was the right brain he listened to that time, and everything else followed. The kid with the ponytail was still going through his pockets. The sullen expression on his face deepened each time he came up dry. Hogan was no fan of smoking. His father, a 2-pack-a-day man, had died of lung cancer, but he had visions of still waiting to be waited on an hour from now. "Hey, kid." The kid looked around, and Hogan flipped him a quarter. "Hey, thanks, my man." "Think nothing of it." The kid concluded his transaction with the beefy Mrs. Scooter, put the cigarettes in one pocket and dropped the remaining 15 cents in another. He made no offer of the change to Hogan, who hadn't really expected it. Boys and girls like this were legion these days. They cluttered the highways from coast to coast, blowing along like tumbleweeds. Perhaps they'd always been there, but to Hogan the current breed seemed both unpleasant and a little scary. Like the rattlers Scooter was now storing in the back room. The snakes in pissant little roadside menageries like this one couldn't kill you. Their venom was milked twice a week and sold to clinics that made drugs with it. You could count on that just as you could count on the winos to show up at the local Red Cross every Tuesday and Thursday to sell their blood. But the snakes could still give you one hell of a painful bite if you got too close and then made 'em mad. That, Hogan thought, was what the current breed of road kids had in common with them. Mrs. Scooter came drifting down the counter, the words on her T-shirt drifting up and down and side to side as she did. "What you need?" she asked. Her tone was still truculent. The West had a reputation for friendliness, and during the 20 years he had spent selling there, Hogan had come to feel the reputation was more often than not deserved. But this woman had all the charm of a Brooklyn shopkeeper who's been stuck up 3 times in the last 2 weeks. Hogan supposed that her kind was becoming as much a part of the scene in the New West as the road kids. Sad but true. "How much are these?" Hogan asked, pointing through the dirty glass at what the sign identified as jumbo Chattery teeth. They walk. The case was filled with novelty items: Chinese finger pullers, pepper gum, Dr. Wacky's sneezing powder, cigarette loads, a laugh riot, according to the package. Hogan guessed they were more likely a great way to get your teeth knocked out. X-ray glasses, plastic vomit, so realistic. Joy buzzers. "I don't know," Miss Scooter said. "Where's the box, I wonder?" The teeth were the only item in the case that wasn't packaged, but they certainly were jumbo, Hogan thought. Super jumbo. In fact, 5 times the size of the sets of wind-up teeth which had so amused him as a kid growing up in Maine. Take away the joke feet and they would look like the teeth of some fallen biblical giant. The cuspids were big white blocks, and the canine teeth looked like tent pegs sunk in the improbably red plastic gums. A key jutted from one gum. The teeth were held together in a clench by a thick rubber band. Mrs. Scooter blew the dust from the Chattery teeth, then turned them over, looking on the soles of the orange shoes for a price sticker. She didn't find one. "I don't know," she said crossly, eyeing Hogan as if he might have taken the sticker off himself. "Only Scooter buy a piece of trash like this here. Been around since Noah got off the boat. I'll have to ask him." Hogan was suddenly tired of the woman and of Scooter's grocery and roadside zoo. They were great Chattery teeth, and Jack would undoubtedly love them, but he had promised 8 at the latest. "Never mind," he said. "It was just an—" "Them teeth was supposed to go for $15.95, if you can believe it," Scooter said from behind them. "They ain't just plastic. Those are metal teeth painted white. They could give you a hell of a bite if they worked. She dropped 'em on the floor 2-3 years ago when she was dusting the inside of the case, and they're busted." Oh, Hogan said, disappointed. That's too bad. I never saw a pair with, feet. Well, there's lots of 'em like that now, Scooter said. They sell 'em at the novelty stores in Vegas and Dry Springs, but I never saw a set as big as those. It's funnier than hell to watch him walk across the floor snapping like a crocodile. Shame the old lady dropped him. Scooter glanced at her, but his wife was looking out at the blowing sand. There was an expression on her face which Hogan couldn't quite decipher. Was it sadness or disgust or both? Scooter looked back at Hogan. I could let him go for $350 if you wanted him. We're getting rid of the novelties anyway. Gonna put rental videotapes in that counter. He closed the storeroom door. The bandana was now pulled down, lying on the dusty front of his shirt. His face was haggard and too thin. Hogan saw what might have been the shadow of serious illness lurking just beneath his desert tan. You could do no such thing, Scooter, the big woman snapped and turned toward him, almost turned on him. Shut your head, Scooter replied. You make my feelings ache. I told you to get Wolf. Myra, if you want him back there in the storeroom, go get him yourself. He began to advance on her, and Hogan was surprised, almost wonder-struck, in fact, when she gave ground. Ain't nothing but a Minnesota coy dog anyway. $3 even, friend, and those chattery teeth are yours. Throw in another buck and you can take Myra's Wolf, too. You got 5, I'll deed the whole place to you. Ain't worth a dog fart since the turnpike went through anyway. The long-haired kid was standing by the door, tearing the top from the pack of cigarettes Hogan had helped buy, and watching this small comic opera with an expression of mean amusement. His small gray-green eyes gleamed, flicking back and forth between Scooter and his wife. Hell with you, Myra said gruffly, and Hogan realized she was close to tears. If you won't get my sweet baby, I will. She stalked past him, almost striking him with one boulder-sized breast. Hogan thought it would have knocked the little man flat if it had connected. Look, Hogan said, I think I'll just shove along. Oh, hell, Scooter said. Don't mind Myra. I got cancer and she's got the change, and it ain't my problem she's having the most trouble living with. Take the darn teeth. Bet you got a boy might like him. Besides, it's probably just a cog knocked a little off track. I bet a man who was handy could get him walking and chomping again. He looked around, his expression helpless and musing. Outside, the wind rose to a brief, thin shriek as the kid opened the door and slipped out. He had decided the show was over, apparently. A cloud of fine grit swirled down the middle aisle between the canned goods and the dog food. I was pretty handy myself at one time, Scooter confided. Hogan did not reply for a long moment. He could not think of anything, quite literally not one single thing to say. He looked down at the jumbo chattery teeth standing on the scratched and cloudy display case, nearly desperate to break the silence. Now that Scooter was standing right in front of him, he could see that the man's eyes were huge and dark, glittering with pain and some heavy dope, Darvon or perhaps morphine, and he spoke the first words that popped into his head. Gee, they don't look broken. He picked the teeth up. They were metal, all right, too heavy to be anything else. And when he looked through the slightly parted jaws, he was surprised at the size of the mainspring that ran the thing. He supposed it would take one that size to make the teeth not only chatter, but walk as well. What had Scooter said? They could give you a hell of a bite if they worked. Hogan gave the thick rubber band an experimental tweak, then stripped it off. He was still looking at the teeth so he wouldn't have to look into Scooter's dark, pain-haunted eyes. He grasped the key, and at last he risked a look up. He was relieved to see that now the thin man was smiling a little. Do you mind? Hogan asked. Not me, Pilgrim. Let her rip. Hogan grinned and turned the key. At first it was all right. There was a series of small ratcheting clicks, and he could see the mainspring winding up. Then on the third turn there was a spronk noise from inside, and the key simply slid bonelessly around in its hole. See? Yes, Hogan said. He set the teeth down on the counter. They stood there on their unlikely orange feet and did nothing. Scooter poked the clenched molars on the left-hand side with the tip of one horny finger. The jaws of the teeth opened. One orange foot rose and took a dreamy half-step forward. Then the teeth stopped moving and the whole rig fell sideways. The chattery teeth came to rest on the wind-up key, a slanted, disembodied grin out here in the middle of no man's land. After a moment or two, the big teeth came together again with a slow click. That was all. Hogan, who had never had a premonition in his life, was suddenly filled with a clear certainty that was both eerie and sickening. A year from now, this man will have been 8 months in his grave, and if someone exhumed his coffin and pried off the lid, they'd see teeth just like these poking out of his dried-out dead face like an enamel trap. He glanced up into Scooter's eyes, glittering like dark gems in tarnished settings, and suddenly it was no longer a question of wanting to get out of here. He had to get out of here. "Well," he said, hoping frantically that Scooter would not stick out his hand to be shaken, "I gotta go. Best of luck to you, sir." Scooter did put his hand out, but not to be shaken. Instead, he snapped the rubber band back around the Chattery teeth. Hogan had no idea why, since they didn't work, set them on their funny cartoon feet, and pushed them across the scratched surface of the counter. "Thank you kindly," he said, "and take these teeth. No charge." "Oh, well, thanks, but I couldn't." "Sure you can," Scooter said. "Take 'em and give 'em to your boy. He'll get a kick out of 'em standing on the shelf in his room, even if they don't work. I know a little about boys. Raised up 3 of 'em." "How did you know I had a son?" Hogan asked. Scooter winked. The gesture was terrifying and pathetic at the same time. "Seen it in your face," he said. "Go on, take 'em." The wind gusted again, this time hard enough to make the boards of the building moan. The sand hitting the windows sounded like fine snow. Hogan picked the teeth up by the plastic feet, surprised all over again by how heavy they were. "Here." Scooter produced a paper bag, almost as wrinkled and crumpled about the edges as his own face, from beneath the counter. "Stick 'em in here. That's a real nice sport coat you got there. If you carry them choppers in the pocket, it'll get pulled out of shape." He put the bag on the counter as if he understood how little Hogan wanted to touch him. "Thanks," Hogan said. He put the Chattery teeth in the bag and rolled down the top. "Jack thanks you, too. He's my son." Scooter smiled, revealing a set of teeth just as false, but nowhere near as large, as the ones in the paper bag. "My pleasure, mister. You drive careful until you get out of the blow. You'll be fine once you get in the foothills." "I know," Hogan cleared his throat. "Thanks again. I hope you, recover soon." "That'd be nice," Scooter said evenly. "But I don't think it's in the cards, do you?" Well..." Hogan realized with dismay that he didn't have the slightest idea how to conclude this encounter. "Take care of yourself." Scooter nodded. "You too." Hogan retreated toward the door, opened it, and had to hold on tight as the wind tried to rip it out of his hand and bang the wall. Fine sand scoured his face, and he slitted his eyes against it. He stepped out, closed the door behind him, and pulled the lapel of his real nice sport coat over his mouth and nose as he crossed the porch, descended the steps, and headed toward the customized Dodge camper van parked just beyond the gas pumps. The wind pulled his hair and the sand stung his cheeks. He was going around to the driver's side door when someone tugged his arm. "Mister! Hey, mister!" He turned. It was the blonde-haired boy with the pale, ratty face. He hunched against the wind and blowing sand, wearing nothing but a T-shirt and a pair of faded 501 jeans. Behind him, Mrs. Scooter was dragging a mangy beast on a choke chain toward the back door of the store. Wolf, the Minnesota coy dog, looked like a half-starved German shepherd pup, and the runt of the litter at that. "What?" Hogan shouted, knowing very well what. "Can I have a ride?" the kid shouted back over the wind. Hogan did not ordinarily pick up hitchhikers, not since one afternoon 5 years ago. He had stopped for a young girl on the outskirts of Tonopah. Standing by the side of the road, the girl had resembled one of those sad-eyed waifs in the UNICEF posters, a kid who looked like her mother and her last friend had both died in the same house fire about a week ago. Once she was in the car, however, Hogan had seen the bad skin and mad eyes of the long-time junkie. By then it was too late. She'd stuck a pistol in his face and demanded his wallet. The pistol was old and rusty. Its grip was wrapped in tattered electrician's tape. Hogan had doubted that it was loaded or that it would fire if it was, but he had a wife and a kid back in L.A., and even if he had been single, was $140 worth risking your life over? He hadn't thought so even then, when he'd just been getting his feet under him in his new line of work, and $140 had seemed a lot more important than it did these days. He gave the girl his wallet. By then, her boyfriend had been parked beside the van. In those days, it had been a Ford Econoline, nowhere near as nice as the custom Dodge XRT, in a dirty blue Chevy Nova. Hogan asked the girl if she'd leave him his driver's license and the pictures of Lita and Jack. "Fuck you, sugar," she said, and slapped him across the face, hard, with his own wallet, before getting out and running to the blue car. Hitchhikers were trouble. But the storm was getting worse, and the kid didn't even have a jacket. What was he supposed to tell him? "Fuck you, sugar? Crawl under a rock with the rest of the lizards until the wind drops?" "Okay," Hogan said. "Thanks, man. Thanks a lot." The kid ran toward the passenger door, tried it, found it locked, and just stood there, waiting to be let in, hunching his shoulders up around his ears. The wind billowed out the back of his shirt like a sail, revealing glimpses of his thin, pimple-studded back. Hogan glanced back at Scooter's grocery and roadside zoo as he went around to the driver's door. Scooter was standing at the window looking out at him. He raised his hand solemnly, palm out. Hogan raised his own in return, then slipped his key into the lock and turned it. He opened the door, pushed the unlock button next to the power window switch, and motioned for the kid to get in. He did, then had to use both hands to pull the door shut again. The wind howled around the van, actually making it rock a little from side to side. "Wow!" the kid gasped, and rubbed his fingers briskly through his hair. He'd lost the sneaker lace, and the hair now lay on his shoulders in lank clots. "Some storm, huh? Big time." "Yeah," Hogan said. There was a console between the two front seats, the kind of seats the brochures like to call captain's chairs, and Hogan placed the paper bag in one of the cup holders. Then he turned the ignition key. The engine started at once with a good-tempered rumble. The kid twisted around in his seat and looked appreciatively into the back of the van. There was a bed, now folded back into a couch, a small LP gas stove, several storage compartments where Hogan kept his various sample cases, and a toilet cubicle at the rear. "Not too tacky, my man," the kid said. "All the comforts." He glanced back at Hogan. "Where you headed?" "Los Angeles." The kid grinned. "Hey, great, so am I." He took out his just-purchased pack of Merritts and tapped one loose. Hogan had put on his headlights and dropped the transmission into drive. Now he shoved the gear shift back into park and turned to the kid. "Let's get a couple of things straight," he said. The kid gave Hogan his wide-eyed, innocent look. "Sure, dude, no prob." "First, I don't pick up hitchhikers as a rule. I had a bad experience with one a few years back. It vaccinated me, you might say. I'll take you through the Santa Clara foothills, but that's all. There's a truck stop on the other side, Sammy's. It's close to the turnpike. That's where we part company, okay?" "Okay, sure, you bet." Still with a wide-eyed look. "Second, if you really have to smoke, we part company right now. That okay?" For just a moment, Hogan saw the kid's other look, and even on short acquaintance, Hogan was almost willing to bet he only had two. The mean, watchful look. Then he was all wide-eyed innocence again, just a harmless refugee from Wayne's World. He tucked the cigarette behind his ear and showed Hogan his empty hands. As he raised them, Hogan noticed the hand-lettered tattoo on the kid's left bicep. Def Leppard forever. "No cigs," the kid said. "I got it." "Fine. Bill Hogan." He held out his hand. "Brian Adams," the kid said, and shook Hogan's hand briefly. Hogan dropped the transmission into drive again and began to roll slowly toward Route 46. As he did, his eyes dropped briefly to a cassette box lying on the dashboard. It was Reckless, by Brian Adams. Sure, he thought. You're Brian Adams, and I'm really Don Henley. We just stopped by Scooter's Grocery and Roadside Zoo to get a little material for our next albums. Right, dude? As he pulled out onto the highway, already straining to see through the blowing dust, he found himself thinking of the girl again, the one outside of Tonopah who had slapped him across the face with his own wallet before fleeing. He was starting to get a very bad feeling about this. Then a hard gust of wind tried to push him into the eastbound lane, and he concentrated on his driving. They rode in silence for a while. When Hogan glanced once to his right, he saw the kid was lying back with his eyes closed, maybe asleep, maybe dozing, maybe just pretending because he didn't want to talk. That was okay. Hogan didn't want to talk either. For one thing, he didn't know what he might have to say to Mr. Brian Adams from Nowhere, USA. It was a cinch young Mr. Adams wasn't in the market for labels or universal price code readers, which was what Hogan sold. For another, just keeping the van on the road had become something of a challenge. As Mrs. Scooter had warned, the storm was intensifying. The road was a dim phantom crossed at irregular intervals by tan ribs of sand. These drifts were like speed bumps, and they forced Hogan to creep along at no more than 25. He could live with that. At some points, however, the sand had spread more evenly across the road's surface, camouflaging it, and then Hogan had to drop down to 15 miles an hour, navigating by the dim bounce back of his headlights from the reflector posts which marched along the side of the road. Every now and then an approaching car or truck would loom out of the blowing sand like a prehistoric phantom with round, blazing eyes. One of these, an old Lincoln Mark IV as big as a cabin cruiser, was driving straight down the center of 46. Hogan hit the horn and squeezed right, feeling the suck of the sand against his tires, feeling his lips peel away from his teeth in a helpless snarl. Just as he became sure the oncomer was going to force him into the ditch, the Lincoln swerved back onto its own side, just enough for Hogan to make it by. He thought he heard the metallic click of his bumper kissing off the Mark IV's rear bumper, but given the steady shriek of the wind, that was almost certainly his own imagination. He did catch just a glimpse of the driver, an old bald-headed man sitting bolt upright behind the wheel, peering into the blowing sand with a concentrated glare that was almost maniacal. Hogan shook his fist at him, but the old codger did not so much as glance at him. Probably didn't even realize I was there, Hogan thought, let alone how close he came to hitting me. For a few seconds he was very close to going off the road anyway. He could feel the sand sucking harder at the right side wheels, felt the van trying to tip. His instinct was to twist the wheel hard to the left. Instead, he fed the van gas and only urged it in that direction, feeling sweat dampen his last good shirt at the armpits. At last, the suck on the tires diminished, and he began to feel in control of the van again. Hogan blew his breath out in a long sigh. "Good piece of driving, man." His attention had been so focused he had forgotten his passenger, and in his surprise he almost twisted the wheel all the way to the left, which would have put them in trouble again. He looked around and saw the blond kid watching him. His gray-green eyes were unsettlingly bright. There was no sign of sleepiness in them. "It was really just luck," Hogan said. "If there was a place to pull over, I would, but I know this piece of road. It's Sammy's or bust. Once we're in the foothills, it'll get better." He did not add that it might take them 3 hours to cover the 70 miles between here and there. "You're a salesman, right?" "As rain." He wished the kid wouldn't talk. He wanted to concentrate on his driving. Up ahead, fog lights loomed out of the murk like yellow ghosts. They were followed by an IROC Z with California plates. The van and the Z crept past each other like old ladies in a nursing home corridor. In the corner of his eye, Hogan saw the kid take the cigarette from behind his ear and begin to play with it. Bryan Adams, indeed. Why had the kid given him a false name? It was like something out of an old Republic movie, the kind of thing you could still see on the Late Late Show, a black-and-white crime movie where the traveling salesman, probably played by Ray Milland, picks up the tough young con, played by Nick Adams, say, who has just broken out of jail in Gabs or Death or someplace like that. "What do you sell, dude?" "Labels." "Labels?" "That's right. The ones with the universal price code on them. It's a little block with a preset number of black bars in it." The kid surprised Hogan by nodding. "Sure, they whip 'em over an electric eye gadget in the supermarket and the price shows up on the cash register like magic, right?" "Yes, except it's not magic and it's not an electric eye. It's a laser reader. I sell those too, both the big ones and the portables." "Far out, dude Mar." The tinge of sarcasm in the kid's voice was faint, but it was there. "Brian?" "Yeah?" "The name's Bill. Not my man, not dude, and most certainly not Dude Mar." He found himself wishing more and more strongly that he could roll back in time to Scooters and just say no when the kid asked him for a ride. The Scooters weren't bad sorts. They would have let the kid stay until the storm blew itself out this evening. Maybe Mrs. Scooter would even have given him $5 to babysit the tarantula, the rattlers, and Woof, the amazing Minnesota coy dog. Hogan found himself liking those gray-green eyes less and less. He could feel their weight on his face like small stones. "Yeah, Bill, the label dude." Bill didn't reply. The kid laced his fingers together and bent his hands backward, cracking the knuckles. "Well, it's like my old mama used to say. May not be much, but it's a living, right, label dude?" Hogan grunted something non-committal and concentrated on his driving. The feeling that he had made a mistake had grown to a certainty. When he picked up the girl that time, God had let him get away with it. "Please," he prayed, "one more time, okay, God? Better yet, let me be wrong about this kid. Let it just be paranoia brought on by low barometer, high winds, and the coincidence of a name that can't, after all, be that uncommon." Here came a huge Mack truck from the other direction, the silver bulldog atop the grill seeming to peer into the flying grit. Hogan squeezed right until he felt the sand piled up along the edge of the road, grabbing greedily at his tires again. The long silver box the Mack was pulling blotted out everything on Hogan's left side. It was 6 inches away, maybe even less, and it seemed to pass forever. When it was finally gone, the blonde kid asked, "You look like you're doing pretty well, Bill. Rig like this must have set you back at least 30 big ones. So why—" "It was a lot less than that." Hogan didn't know if Brian Adams could hear the edgy note in his voice, but he sure could. "I did a lot of the work myself." "All the same, you sure ain't staggering around hungry. So why aren't you up above all this shit flying the friendly skies?" Was a question Hogan sometimes asked himself in the long, empty miles between Tempe and Tucson, or Las Vegas and Los Angeles. The kind of question you had to ask yourself when you couldn't find anything on the radio but crappy synthopop or threadbare oldies, and you'd listen to the last cassette of the current bestseller from Recorded Books, when there was nothing to look at but miles of gully washes and scrubland, all of it owned by Uncle Sam. He could say that he got a better feel for his customers and their needs by traveling through the country where they lived and sold their goods, and it was true, but it wasn't the reason. He could say that checking his sample cases, which were much too bulky to fit under an airline seat, was a pain in the ass, and waiting for him to show up on the conveyor belt at the other end was always an adventure. He'd once had a packing case filled with 5,000 soft drink labels show up in Hilo, Hawaii, instead of Hillside, Arizona. That was also true, but it also wasn't the reason. The reason was that in 1982 he had been on board a Western Pride commuter flight which had crashed in the high country 17 miles north of Reno. 6 of the 19 passengers on board and both crew members had been killed. Hogan had suffered a broken back. He had spent 4 months in bed and another 10 in a heavy brace his wife Lita called the Iron Maiden. They, whoever they were, said that if you got thrown from a horse, you should get right back on. William I. Hogan said that was bullshit, and with the exception of a white-knuckle 2-Valium flight to attend his father's funeral in New York, he'd never been on a plane since. He came out of these thoughts all at once, realizing 2 things. He had had the road to himself since the passage of the Mac, and the kid was still looking at him with those unsettling eyes, waiting for him to answer the question. "I had a bad experience on a commuter flight once," he said. "Since then, I've pretty much stuck to transport where you can coast into the breakdown lane if your engine quits." "You sure have had a lot of bad experiences, Bill Dude," the kid said. A tone of bogus regret crept into his voice. "And now, so sorry, you're about to have another one." There was a sharp metallic click. Hogan looked over and was not very surprised to see the kid was holding a switch knife with a glittering 8-inch blade. Oh, shit, Hogan thought. Now that it was here, now that it was right in front of him, he didn't feel very scared, only tired. Oh, shit, and only 400 miles from home. God damn. "Pull over, Bill Dude. Nice and slow." "What do you want?" "If you really don't know the answer to that one, you're even dumber than you look." A little smile played around the corners of the kid's mouth. The homemade tattoo on the kid's arm rippled as the muscle beneath it twitched. "I want your dough, and I guess I want your rollin' whorehouse too, at least for a while. But don't worry, there's this little truck stop not too far from here, Sammy's, close to the turnpike. Someone'll give you a ride. People who don't stop will look at you like you're dog shit they found on their shoes, of course, and you might have to beg a little, but I'm sure you'll get a ride in the end. Now pull over." Hogan was a little surprised to find that he felt angry as well as tired. Had he been angry that other time when the road girl had stolen his wallet? He couldn't honestly remember. "Don't pull that shit on me," he said, turning to the kid. "I gave you a ride when you needed one, and I didn't make you beg for it. If it wasn't for me, you'd still be eating sand with your thumb out, so why don't you just put that thing away?" Well, the kid suddenly lashed forward with the knife, and Hogan felt a thread of burning pain across his right hand. The van swerved, then shuddered as it passed over another of those sandy speed bumps. "Pull over," I said. You're either walking label, dude, or you're lying in the nearest gully with your throat cut and one of your own price-reading gadgets jammed up your ass. You want to know something? I'm gonna chain smoke all the way to Los Angeles, and every time I finish a cigarette, I'm gonna butt it out on your fucking dashboard. Hogan glanced down at his hand and saw a diagonal line of blood which stretched from the last knuckle of his pinky to the base of his thumb. And here was the anger again, only now it was really rage, and if the tiredness was still there, it was buried somewhere in the middle of that irrational red eye. He tried to summon a mental picture of Lita and Jack to damp that feeling down before it got the better of him and made him do something crazy, but the images were fuzzy and out of focus. There was a clear image in his mind, but it was the wrong one. It was the face of the girl outside of Tonopah, the girl with the snarling mouth below the sad poster child eyes, the girl who had said, "Fuck you, sugar," before slapping him across the face with his own wallet. He stepped down on the gas pedal and the van began to move faster. The red needle moved past 30. The kid looked surprised, then puzzled, then angry. "What are you doing? I told you to pull over. You want your guts in your lap or what?" "I don't know," Hogan said. He kept his foot on the gas. Now the needle was trembling just above 40. The van ran across a series of dunelets and shivered like a dog with a fever. "What do you want, kid? How about a broken neck? All it takes is one twist of the wheel. I fastened my seat belt and noticed you forgot yours." The kid's gray-green eyes were huge now, glittering with a mixture of fear and fury. "You're supposed to pull over," those eyes said. "That's the way it's supposed to work when I'm holding a knife on you. Don't you know that?" "You won't wreck us," the kid said, but Hogan thought he was trying to convince himself. "Why not?" Hogan turned toward the kid again. "After all, I'm pretty sure I'll walk away, and the van's insured. You call the play, asshole. What about that?" "You," the kid began, and then his eyes widened, and he lost all interest in Hogan. "Look out!" he screamed. Hogan snapped his eyes forward and saw 4 huge white headlamps bearing down on him through the flying rack outside. It was a tanker truck, probably carrying gasoline or propane. An air horn beat the air like the cry of a gigantic, enraged goose. Honk, honk, honk. The van had drifted while Hogan was trying to deal with the kid. Now he was the one halfway across the road. He yanked the wheel hard to the right, knowing it would do no good, knowing it was already too late. But the approaching truck was also moving, squeezing over just as Hogan had tried to squeeze over in order to accommodate the Mark IV. The two vehicles danced past each other through the blowing sand with less than a gasp between them. Hogan felt his right side wheels bite into the sand again, and he knew that this time he didn't have a chance in hell of holding the van on the road, not at 40+ miles an hour. As the dim shape of the big steel tank, Carter's Farm Supplies and Organic Fertilizer, was painted along the side, slid from view, he felt the steering wheel go mushy in his hands, dragging farther to the right, and from the corner of his eyes he saw the kid leaning forward with his knife. "What's the matter with you? Are you crazy?" He wanted to scream at the kid, but it would have been a stupid question even if he'd had time enough to articulate it. Sure, the kid was crazy. You only had to take a good look into those gray-green eyes to see it. Hogan must have been crazy himself to give the kid a ride in the first place, but none of that mattered now. He had a situation to cope with here, and if he allowed himself the luxury of believing this couldn't be happening to him, if he allowed himself to think that for even a single second, he would probably be found tomorrow or the next day with his throat cut and his eyes nibbled out of their sockets by the buzzards. This was really happening. It was a true thing. The kid tried his level best to plant the blade in Hogan's neck, but the van had begun to tilt by then, running deeper and deeper into the sand-choked gully. Hogan recoiled back from the blade, letting go of the wheel entirely, and thought he'd gotten clear until he felt the wet warmth of blood drench the side of his neck. The knife had unzipped his right cheek from jaw to temple. He flailed with his right hand, trying to get the kid's wrist, and then the van's left front wheel struck a rock the size of a pay telephone, and the van flipped high and hard like a stunt vehicle in one of those movies this rootless kid undoubtedly loved. It rolled in midair, all 4 wheels turning, still doing 30 miles an hour according to the speedometer, and Hogan felt his seatbelt lock painfully across his chest and belly. It was like reliving the plane crash. Now as then, he could not get it through his head that this was really happening. The kid was thrown upward and forward, still holding on to the knife. His head bounced off the roof as the van's top and bottom swapped places. Hogan saw his left hand waving wildly and realized with amazement that the kid was still trying to stab him. He was a rattler, all right. Hogan had been right about that, but no one had milked his poison sacks. Then the van struck the desert hardpan, peeling off the luggage racks, and the kid's head connected with the roof again, much harder this time. The knife was jolted from his hand. The cabinets at the rear of the van sprang open, spraying sample books and laser label readers everywhere. Hogan was dimly aware of an inhuman screaming sound, the long, drawn-out squall of the XRT's roof sliding across the gravelly desert surface on the far side of the gully, and thought, so this is what it would be like to be inside a tin can when someone was using the opener. The windshield shattered, blowing inward in a sagging shield, clouded by a million zigzagging cracks. Hogan shut his eyes and threw his hands up to shield his face as the van continued to roll, thumping down on Hogan's side long enough to shatter the driver's side window and admit a rattle of rocks and dusty earth before staggering upright again. It rocked as if meaning to go over on the kid's side, and then came to rest. Hogan sat where he was, without moving, for perhaps 5 seconds, eyes wide, hands gripping the armrests of his chair, feeling a little like Captain Kirk in the aftermath of a Klingon attack. He was aware there was a lot of dirt and crumbled glass in his lap, and something else as well, but not what the something else was. He was also aware of the wind blowing more dirt through the van's broken windows. Then his vision was temporarily blocked by a swiftly moving object. The object was a model of white skin, brown dirt, raw knuckles, and red blood. It was a fist, and it struck Hogan squarely in the nose. The agony was immediate and intense, as if someone had fired a flare gun directly into his brain. For a moment, his vision was gone, swallowed in a vast white flash. It had just begun to come back when the kid's hands suddenly clamped around his neck, and he could no longer breathe. The kid, Mr. Brian Adams from Nowhere, USA, was leaning over the console between the front seats. Blood from perhaps half a dozen different scalp wounds had flowed over his cheeks and forehead and nose like war paint. His gray-green eyes stared at Hogan with fixed, lunatic fury. "Look what you did, you fuck!" the kid shouted. "Look what you did to me!" Hogan tried to pull back and got half a breath when the kid's hold slipped momentarily, but with his seatbelt still buckled and still locked down as well from the feel, there was really nowhere he could go. The kid's hands were back almost at once, and this time his thumbs were pressing into his windpipe, pinching it shut. Hogan tried to bring his own hands up, but the kid's arms, as rigid as prison bars, blocked him. He tried to knock the kid's arms away, but they wouldn't budge. Now he could hear another wind, a high, roaring wind inside his own head. "Look what you did, you stupid shit! I'm bleeding!" The kid's voice but further away than it had been. "He's killing me," Hogan thought, and a voice replied, "Right. Fuck you, sugar." That brought the anger back. He groped in his lap for whatever was there besides dirt and glass. It was a paper bag with some bulky object, Hogan couldn't remember exactly what, inside it. Hogan closed his hand around it and pistoned his fist upward toward the shelf of the kid's jaw. It connected with a heavy thud. The kid screamed in surprised pain, and his grip on Hogan's throat was suddenly gone as he fell over backward. Hogan pulled in a deep, convulsive breath and heard a sound like a tea kettle howling to be taken off the burner. "Is that me making that sound? My God, is that me?" He dragged in another breath. It was full of flying dust. It hurt his throat and made him cough, but it was heaven all the same. He looked down at his fist and saw the shape of the Chattery teeth clearly outlined against the brown bag, and suddenly felt them move. There was something so shockingly human in this movement that Hogan shrieked and dropped the bag at once. It was as if he had picked up a human jawbone which had tried to speak to his hand. The bag hit the kid's back and then tumbled to the van's carpeted floor as Brian Adams pushed himself groggily to his knees. Hogan heard the rubber band snap and then the unmistakable click and chutter of the teeth themselves opening and closing. "It's probably just a cog knocked a little off track," Scooter had said. "I bet a man who was handy could get 'em walking and chomping again." Or maybe just a good knock would do it, Hogan thought. If I live through this and ever get back that way, I'll have to tell Scooter that all you have to do to fix a pair of malfunctioning Chattery teeth is roll your van over and then use 'em to hit a psychotic hitchhiker who's trying to strangle you. So simple, even a child could do it. The teeth clattered and smacked inside the torn brown bag. The sides fluttered, making it look like an amputated lung which refused to die. The kid crawled away from the bag without even looking at it, crawled toward the back of the van, shaking his head from side to side, trying to clear it. Blood flew from the clots of his hair in a fine spray. Hogan found the clasp of his seatbelt and pushed the pop release. Nothing happened. The square in the center of the buckle did not give even a little, and the belt itself was still locked as tight as a cramp, cutting into the middle-aged roll of fat above the waistband of his trousers and pushing a hard diagonal across his chest. He tried rocking back and forth in the seat, hoping that would unlock the belt. The flow of blood from his face increased, and he could feel his cheek flapping back and forth like a strip of dried wallpaper, but that was all. He felt panic struggling to break through a mazed shock and twisted his head over his right shoulder to see what the kid was up to. It turned out to be no good. He had spotted his knife at the far end of the van, lying atop a litter of instructional manuals and brochures. He grabbed it, flicked his hair away from his face, and peered back over his own shoulder at Hogan. He was grinning, and there was something in that grin that made Hogan's balls simultaneously tighten and shrivel until it felt as if someone had tucked a couple of peach pits into his jockey shorts. "Ah, here it is," the kid's grin said. "For a minute or two there I was worried, quite seriously worried, but everything's going to come out all right after all. Things got a little improvisational there for a while, but now we're back to the script." "You stuck, label dude?" the kid asked over the steady shriek of the wind. "You are, ain't you? Good thing you buckled your belt, right? Good thing for me." The kid tried to get up, almost made it, and then his knees buckled. An expression of surprise so magnified it would have been comic under other circumstances crossed his face. Then he flicked his blood-greasy hair out of his face again and began to crawl toward Hogan, his left hand wrapped around the imitation bone handle of the knife. The Def Leppard tattoo ebbed and flowed with each flex of his impoverished bicep, making Hogan think of the way the words on Myra's T-shirt, "Nevada is God's country," had rippled when she moved. Hogan grasped the seatbelt buckle with both hands and drove his thumbs against the pop release as enthusiastically as the kid had driven his into Hogan's windpipe. There was absolutely no response. The belt was frozen. He craned his neck to look at the kid again. The kid had made it as far as the fold-up bed and then stopped. That expression of large comic surprise had resurfaced on his face. He was staring straight ahead, which meant he was looking at something on the floor, and Hogan suddenly remembered the teeth. They were still chattering away. He looked down in time to see the jumbo Chattery teeth march from the open end of the torn paper bag on their funny orange shoes. The molars and the canines and the incisors chopped rapidly up and down, producing a sound like ice in a cocktail shaker. The shoes, dressed up in their tony white spats, almost seemed to bounce along the gray carpet. Hogan found himself thinking of Fred Astaire tap-dancing his way across a stage and back again. Fred Astaire with a cane tucked under his arm and a straw boater tipped saucily forward over one eye. "Oh, shit," the kid said, half laughing. "Is that what you were dickering for back there? Oh, man, I'd kill you, label dude. I'm going to be doing the world a favor." The key, Hogan thought. The key on the side of the teeth, the one you used to wind them up. It isn't turning. And he suddenly had another of those precognitive flashes. He understood exactly what was going to happen. The kid was going to reach for them. The teeth abruptly stopped walking and chattering. They simply stood there on the slightly tilted floor of the van, jaws slightly agape. Eyeless, they still seemed to peer quizzically up at the kid. "Chattery teeth," Mr. Brian Adams from Nowhere, USA, marveled. He reached out and curled his right hand around them, just as Hogan had known he would. "Bite him!" Hogan shrieked. "Bite his fucking fingers right off!" The kid's head snapped up, the gray-green eyes wide with startlement. He gaped at Hogan for a moment, that big expression of totally dumb surprise, and then he began to laugh. His laughter was high and shrieky, a perfect complement to the wind howling through the van and billowing the curtains like long ghost hands. "Bite me! Bite me! Bite me!" the kid chanted, as if it were the punchline to the funniest joke he'd ever heard. "Hey, label dude! I thought I was the one who bumped my head." The kid clamped the handle of the switchblade in his own teeth and stuck the forefinger of his left hand between the jumbo Chattery teeth. "Aye!" he said around the knife. He giggled and wiggled his finger between the oversized jaws. "Aye! Aye! The teeth didn't move. Neither did the orange feet. Hogan's premonition collapsed around him the way dreams do upon waking. The kid wiggled his finger between the Chattery teeth one more time, began to pull it out, then began screaming at the top of his lungs, "Oh, shit! Shit, motherfucker!" For a moment, Hogan's heart leaped in his chest, and then he realized that although the kid was still screaming, what he was really doing was laughing at him. The teeth had remained perfectly still the whole time. The kid lifted the teeth up for a closer look as he grasped his knife again. He shook the long blade at the Chattery teeth like a teacher shaking his pointer at a naughty student. "You shouldn't bite," he said. "That's very bad behavior." One of the orange feet took a sudden step forward on the grimy palm of the kid's hand. The jaws opened at the same time, and before Hogan was fully aware of what was happening, the Chattery teeth had closed on the kid's nose. This time, Bryan Adams' scream was real, a thing of agony and ultimate surprise. He flailed at the teeth with his right hand, trying to bat them away, but they were locked on his nose as tightly as Hogan's seatbelt was locked around his middle. Blood and filaments of torn gristle burst out between the canines in red strings. The kid jackknifed backward, and for a moment Hogan could see only his flailing body, lashing elbows and kicking feet. Then he saw the glitter of the knife. The kid screamed again and bolted into a sitting position. His long hair had fallen over his face in a curtain. The clamped teeth stuck out like the rudder of some strange boat. The kid had somehow managed to insert the blade of his knife between the teeth and what remained of his nose. "Kill him!" Hogan shouted hoarsely. He had lost his mind. On some level, he understood that he must have lost his mind, but for the time being, that didn't matter. "Go on! Kill him!" The kid shrieked a long, piercing fire whistle sound and twisted the knife. The blade snapped, but not before it had managed to pry the disembodied jaws at least part way open. The teeth fell off his face and into his lap. Most of the kid's nose fell off with them. The kid shook his hair back. His gray-green eyes were crossed, trying to look down at the mangled stump in the middle of his face. His mouth was drawn down in a rictus of pain. The tendons in his neck stood out like pulley wires. The kid reached for the teeth. The teeth stepped nimbly backward on their orange cartoon feet. They were nodding up and down, marching in place, grinning at the kid, who was now sitting with his ass on his calves. Blood drenched the front of his T-shirt. The kid said something then that confirmed Hogan's belief that he, Hogan, had lost his mind. Only in a fantasy born of delirium would such words be spoken. "Give me back my nose, you son of a bitch!" The kid reached for the teeth again, and this time they ran forward, under his snatching hand, between his spread legs, and there was a meaty chomp sound as they closed on the bulge of faded blue denim just below the place where the zipper of the kid's jeans ended. Bryan Adams' eyes flew wide open, so did his mouth. His hands rose to the level of his shoulders, springing wide open, and for a moment he looked like some strange Al Jolson imitator preparing to sing Mammy. The switch knife flew over his shoulder to the back of the van. "Jesus! Jesus! Jesus!" The orange feet were pumping rapidly as if doing a Highland fling. The pink jaws of the jumbo Chattery teeth nodded rapidly up and down as if saying, "Yes! Yes! Yes!" and then shook back and forth just as rapidly as if saying, "No! No! No!" As the cloth of the kid's jeans began to rip, and that was not all that was ripping by the sound, Bill Hogan passed out. He came to twice. The first time must have been only a short while later, because the storm was still howling through and around the van, and the light was about the same. He started to turn around, but a monstrous bolt of pain shot up his neck. Whiplash, of course, and probably not as bad as it could have been, or would be tomorrow, for that matter. Always supposing he lived until tomorrow. The kid. I have to look and make sure he's dead. No, you don't. Of course he's dead. If he wasn't, you would be. Now he began to hear a new sound from behind him, the steady chutter-click-chutter of the teeth. They're coming for me. They finished with the kid, but they're still hungry, so they're coming for me. He placed his hands on the seatbelt buckle again, but the pop release was still hopelessly jammed. and his hands seemed to have no strength anyway. The teeth grew steadily closer. They were right in back of his seat now from the sound, and Hogan's confused mind read a rhyme into their ceaseless chomping. Clickety, 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 clack. We are the teeth and we're coming back. Watch us walk, watch us chew. We ate him and now we'll eat you. Hogan closed his eyes. The clittering sound stopped. Now there was only the ceaseless whine of the wind and the spick-spack of sand striking the dented side of the XRT van. Hogan waited. After a long, long time, he heard a single click, followed by the minute sound of tearing fibers. There was a pause. Then the click and the tearing sound was repeated. What's it doing? The third time the click and the small tearing sound came, he felt the back of his seat moving a little and understood. The teeth were pulling themselves up to where he was. Somehow, they were pulling themselves up to him. Hogan thought of the teeth closing on the bulge below the zipper of the kid's jeans and willed himself to pass out again. Sand flew in through the broken windshield, tickled his cheeks and forehead. Click, rip, click, rip, click, rip. The last one was very close. Hogan didn't want to look down, but he was unable to help himself. And beyond his right hip, where the seat cushion met the seat's back, he saw a wide, white grin. It moved upward with agonizing slowness, pushing with the as yet unseen orange feet as it nipped a small fold of gray seat cover between its incisors. Then the jaws let go, and it lurched convulsively upward. This time, what the teeth fastened on was the pocket of Hogan's slacks, and he passed out again. When he came to the second time, the wind had dropped and it was almost dark. The air had taken on a queer purple shade Hogan could not remember ever having seen in the desert before. The skirls of sand running across the desert floor beyond the sagging ruin of the windshield looked like fleeing ghost children. For a moment he could remember nothing at all of what had happened to land him here. The last clear memory he could touch was of looking at his gas gauge, seeing it was down to an eighth, then looking up and seeing a sign at the side of the road which said, "Scooters, grocery, and roadside zoo, gas, snacks, cold beer, see live rattlesnakes." He understood that he could hold on to this amnesia for a while if he wanted to. Given a little time, his subconscious might even be able to wall off certain dangerous memories permanently. But it could also be dangerous not to remember. Very dangerous. Because the wind gusted. Sand rattled against the badly dented driver's side of the van. It sounded almost like teeth, teeth, teeth. The fragile surface of his amnesia shattered, letting everything pour through, and all the heat fell from the surface of Hogan's skin. He uttered a rusty squawk as he remembered the sound. Chump, the Chattery teeth had made as they closed on the kid's balls. And he closed his hands over his own crotch, eyes rolling fearfully in their sockets as he looked for the runaway teeth. He didn't see them, but the ease with which his shoulders followed the movement of his hands was new. He looked down at his lap and slowly removed his hands from his crotch. His seat belt was no longer holding him prisoner. It lay on the gray carpet in two pieces. The metal tongue of the pull-up section was still buried inside the buckle, but beyond it there was only ragged red fabric. The belt had not been cut. It had been gnawed through. He looked up into the rear-view mirror and saw something else. The back doors of the van were standing open, and there was only a vague, man-shaped red outline on the gray carpet where the kid had been. Mr. Brian Adams, from Nowhere, USA, was gone. So were the Chattery teeth. Hogan got out of the van slowly, like an old man afflicted with a terrible case of arthritis. He found that if he held his head perfectly level, it wasn't too bad, but if he forgot and moved it in any direction, a series of exploding bolts went off in his neck, shoulders, and upper back. Even the thought of allowing his head to roll backward was unbearable. He walked slowly to the rear of the van, running his hand lightly over the dented, paint-peeled surface, hearing and feeling the glass as it crunched under his feet. He stood at the far end of the driver's side for a long time. He was afraid to turn the corner. He was afraid that when he did, he would see the kid squatting on his hunkers, holding the knife in his left hand and grinning that empty grin. But he couldn't just stand here, holding his head on top of his strained neck like a big bottle of nitroglycerin while it got dark around him, so at last Hogan went around. Nobody. The kid was really gone. Or so it seemed at first. The wind gusted, blowing Hogan's hair around his bruised face, then dropped away completely. When it did, he heard a harsh scraping noise coming from about 20 yards beyond the van. He looked in that direction and saw the soles of the kid's sneakers just disappearing over the top of a dry wash. The sneakers were spread in a limp V. They stopped moving for a moment, as if whatever was hauling the kid's body needed a few moments' rest to recoup its strength, and then they began to move again in little jerks. A picture of terrible, unendurable clarity suddenly rose in Hogan's mind. He saw the jumbo Chattery teeth standing on their funny orange feet just over the edge of that wash, standing there in spats so cool they made the coolest of the California raisins look like Hicks from Fargo, North Dakota, standing there in the electric purple light which had overspread these empty lands west of Las Vegas. They were clamped shut on a thick wad of the kid's long blonde hair. The Chattery teeth were backing up. The Chattery teeth were dragging Mr. Brian Adams away to nowhere, USA. Hogan turned in the other direction and walked slowly toward the road, holding his nitro head straight and steady on top of his neck. It took him 5 minutes to negotiate the ditch and another 15 to flag a ride, but he eventually managed both things, and during that time he never looked back once. 9 months later, on a clear, hot summer day in June, Bill Hogan happened by Scooter's Grocery and Roadside Zoo again, except the place had been renamed Myra's Place, the sign now said. Gas, cold beer, videos. Below the words was a picture of a wolf, or maybe just a woof, snarling at the moon. Wolf himself, the amazing Minnesota coy dog, was lying in a cage in the shade of the porch overhang. His back legs were sprawled extravagantly, and his muzzle was on his paws. He did not get up when Hogan got out of his car to fill the tank. Of the rattlesnakes and the tarantula, there was no sign. "Hi, Wolf," he said as he went up the steps. The cage's inmate rolled over onto his back and allowed his long red tongue to dangle enticingly from the side of his mouth as he stared up at Hogan. The store looked bigger and cleaner inside. Hogan guessed this was partly because the day outside was not so threatening, but that wasn't all. The windows had been washed, for one thing, and that made a big difference. The board walls had been replaced with pine paneling that still smelled fresh and sappy. A snack bar with 5 stools had been added at the back. The novelty case was still there, but the cigarette loads, the joy buzzers, and Dr. Wacky's sneezing powder were gone. The case was filled with videotape boxes. A hand-lettered sign read X-rated in back room, be 18 or be gone. The woman at the cash register was standing in profile to Hogan, looking down at a calculator and running numbers on it. For a moment Hogan was sure this was Mr. and Mrs. Scooter's daughter, the female complement to those 3 boys Scooter had talked about raising. Then she lifted her head, and Hogan saw it was Mrs. Scooter herself. It was hard to believe this could be the woman whose mammoth bosom had almost burst the seams of her Nevada is God's Country t-shirt, but it was. Mrs. Scooter had lost at least 50 pounds and dyed her hair a sleek and shiny walnut brown. Only the sun wrinkles around the eyes and mouth were the same. "Get your gas?" she asked. "Yep, $15 worth." He handed her a 20 and she rang it up. "Place looks a lot different from the last time I was in." "Been a lot of changes since Scooter died, all right," she agreed, and pulled a 5 out of the register. She started to hand it over, really looked at him for the first time, and hesitated. "Say, ain't you the guy who almost got killed the day we had that storm last year?" He nodded and stuck out his hand. "Bill Hogan." She didn't hesitate, simply reached over the counter and gave his hand a single strong pump. The death of her husband seemed to have improved her disposition, or maybe it was just that the waiting for it to happen was over. "I'm sorry about your husband. He seemed like a nice enough sort." "Scoot? Yeah, he's a good enough fellow before he took ill," she agreed. "What about you? You all recovered?" Hogan nodded. "I wore a neck brace for about 6 weeks, not for the first time either, but I'm okay." She was looking at the scar which twisted down his right cheek. "He do that? That kid?" "Yeah." "Stuck you pretty bad." "Yeah." I heard he got busted up in the crash and then crawled into the desert to die. She was looking at Hogan shrewdly. That about right? Hogan smiled a little. Near enough, I guess. JT, he's the state bear around these parts, said the animals worked him over pretty good. Desert rats are awful impolite that way. I don't know much about that part. JT said the kid's own mother wouldn't have recognized him. She put a hand on her reduced bosom and looked at him earnestly. If I'm lying, I'm dying. Hogan laughed out loud. In the weeks and months since the day of the storm, this was something he found himself doing more often. He had come, it sometimes seemed to him, to a slightly different arrangement with life since that day. Lucky he didn't kill you, Mrs. Scooter said. You had a hell of a narrow escape. God must have been with you. That's right, Hogan agreed. He looked down at the video case. I see you took out the novelties. Damn nasty old things, you bet. That's the first thing I did after. Her eyes suddenly widened. Oh, say, jeepers, I got something belongs to you. If I was to forget, I reckon Scooter'd come back and haunt me. Hogan frowned, puzzled, but the woman was already going behind the counter. She stood on tiptoe and brought something down from a high shelf above the rack of cigarettes. It was, Hogan saw, with absolutely no surprise at all, the jumbo Chattery teeth. The woman set them down beside the cash register. Hogan stared at that frozen, insouciant grin with a deep sense of déjà vu. There they were, the world's biggest set of Chattery teeth, standing on their funny orange shoes beside the Slim Jim display, cool as a mountain breeze, grinning up at him as if to say, Hello there. Did you forget me? I didn't forget you, my friend. Not at all. I found him on the porch the next day after the storm blew itself out, Mrs. Scooter said. She laughed. Just like old Scoot to give you something for free, then stick it in a bag with a hole in the bottom. I was going to throw 'em out, but he said he gave 'em to you and I should stick 'em on a shelf someplace. He said a traveling man who came in once would most likely come in again, and here you are. Yes, Hogan agreed. Here I am. He picked up the teeth and slipped his finger between the slightly gaping jaws. He ran the pad of the finger along the molars at the back, and in his mind he heard the kid, Mr. Brian Adams from Nowhere, USA, chanting, Bite me! Bite me! Bite me! Were the back teeth still streaked with the dull rust of the boy's blood? Hogan thought he could see something way back in there, but perhaps it was only a shadow. I saved it because Scooter said you had a boy. Hogan nodded. I do. And, he thought, the boy still has a father. I'm holding the reason why. The question is, did they walk all the way back here on their little orange feet because this was home? Or because they somehow knew what Scooter knew, that sooner or later a traveling man always comes back to where he's been, the way a murderer is supposed to revisit the scene of his crime? Well, if you still want 'em, they're still yours, she said. For a moment she looked solemn, and then she laughed. Shit, I probably would have thrown 'em out anyway, except I forgot about 'em. Of course, they're still broken. Hogan turned the key jutting out of the gum. It went around twice, making little wind-up clicks, then simply turned uselessly in its socket. Broken. Of course they were, and would be, until they decided they didn't want to be broken for a while. And the question wasn't how they had gotten back here, and the question wasn't even why. That was simple. They'd been waiting for him, for Mr. William I. Hogan. They had been waiting for the label dude. The question was this: what did they want? He poked his finger into the white steel grin again and whispered, Bite me. Do you want to? The teeth only stood there on their super cool orange feet and grinned. They ain't talking, seems like, Mrs. Scooter said. No, Hogan said, and suddenly he found himself thinking of the kid, Mr. Brian Adams from Nowhere, USA. A lot of kids like him now. A lot of grown-ups, too, blowing along the highways like tumbleweed, always ready to take your wallet, say, Fuck you, sugar, and run. You could stop picking up hitchhikers, he had, and you could put a burglar alarm system in your home, he'd done that too. But it was still a hard world where planes sometimes fell out of the sky, and the crazies were apt to turn up any place, and there was always room for a little more insurance. He had a wife, after all. and a son. It might be nice if Jack had a set of jumbo Chattery teeth sitting on his desk, just in case something happened. Just in case. "Thank you for saving him," he said, picking the Chattery teeth up carefully by the feet. "I think my kid'll get a kick out of 'em, even if they are broken." "Thanks, Scoot, not me. You want a bag?" She grinned. "I got a plastic one, no holes, guaranteed." Hogan shook his head and slipped the Chattery teeth into his sport coat pocket. "I'll carry them this way," he said, and grinned right back at her. "Keep them handy." "Suit yourself." As he started for the door, she called after him, "Stop back again. I make a damn good chicken salad sandwich." "I'll bet you do, and I will," Hogan said. He went out, down the steps, and stood for a moment in the hot desert sunshine, smiling. He felt good. He felt good a lot these days. He had come to think that was just the way to be. To his left, Woof, the amazing Minnesota coy dog, got to his feet, poked his snout through the crisscross of wire on the side of his cage, and barked. In Hogan's pocket, the Chattery teeth clicked together once. The sound was soft, but Hogan heard it and felt them move. He patted his pocket. "Easy, big fella," he said softly. He walked briskly across the yard, climbed behind the wheel of his new Chevrolet van, and drove away toward Los Angeles. He had promised Lita and Jack he would be home by 7, 8 at the latest. And he was a man who liked to keep his promises.
All right. It's time for the intermission. See you guys in 10 minutes when we will be back with The Juniper Tree by Peter Straub. Hey guys, the intermission is ending. Come back. The intermission's almost over. All right, our second story of the evening is called The Juniper Tree by Peter Straub. This is a semi-autobiographical story based on real events in the author's life. And this is one of those stories which takes place in the 1950s when the author was 7 years old, and therefore I must once again mention that the world was a very different place back then, and it was a time when 7-year-olds were regularly left unattended and free to wander the streets of a major city without anyone really giving a second thought to their safety or giving a shit about where they're supposed to be or who's looking after them. So, you know, it's hard to imagine, but you're gonna have to imagine a world like that. All right, here we go.
The Juniper Tree. It is a schoolyard in my Midwest of empty lots waving green and brilliant with tiger lilies, of ugly new ranch houses set down in rows in glistening clay, of treeless avenues cooking in the sun. Our schoolyard is of black asphalt. On June days, patches of the asphalt loosen and stick like gum to the soles of our high-top basketball shoes. Most of the playground is black, empty space, from which heat radiates up like the wavery images on the screen of a faulty television set. Tall wire mesh surrounds it. A new boy named Paul is standing beside me. Though it is now nearly the final month of the semester, Paul came to us carroty-haired, pale-eyed, too shy to ask even the whereabouts of the lavatory, only 6 weeks ago. The lessons baffle him, and his southern accent is a fatal error of style. The popular students broadcast in hushed, giggling whispers the terrible news that Paul talks like a nigger. Their voices are almost awed. They are conscious of the enormity of what they are saying, of the enormity of its consequences. Paul is wearing a brilliant red shirt, too heavy, too enveloping for the weather. He and I stand in the shade at the rear of the school, before the cream-colored brick wall in which is placed at eye level a newly broken window of pebbly green glass reinforced with strands of copper wire. At our feet is a little scatter of green, edible-looking pebbles. The pebbles dig into the soles of our shoes, too hard to shatter against the softer asphalt. Paul is singing to me in his slow, lilting voice that he will never have friends in this school. I put my foot down on one of the green candy pebbles and feel it push up, hard as a bullet, against my foot. "Children are so cruel," Paul casually sings. I think of sliding the pebble of broken glass across my throat, slicing myself wide open to let death in. Paul did not return to school in the fall. His father, who had beaten a man to death down in Mississippi, had been arrested while leaving a movie theater near my house, named the Orpheum Oriental. Paul's father had taken his family to see an Esther Williams movie co-starring Fernando Lamas, and when they came out, their mouths raw from salty popcorn, the baby's hands sticky with spilled Coca-Cola, the police were waiting for them. They were Mississippi people, and I think of Paul now seated at a desk on a floor of an office building in Jackson, filled with men like him at desks, his tie perfectly knotted, a good shine on his cordovan shoes, a necessary but unconscious restraint in the set of his mouth. In those days, I used to spend whole days in the Orpheum Oriental. I was 7. I held with me the idea of a disappearance like Paul's, of never having to be seen again, of being an absence, a shadow, a place where something no longer visible used to be. Before I met that young old man whose name was Frank, or Stan, or Jimmy, when I sat in the rapture of education before the movies at the Orpheum Oriental, I watched Alan Ladd and Richard Widmark and Glenn Ford and Dane Clark. Chicago Deadline. Martin and Lewis tangled up in the same parachute in At War with the Army, William Boyd and Roy Rogers. Open-mouthed, I drank down movies about spies and criminals, wanting the passionate and shadowy ones to fulfill themselves, to gorge themselves on what they needed. The feverish gaze of Richard Widmark, the anger of Alan Ladd, Barry Kroger's sneaky eyes, girlish and watchful, vivid, total elegance. When I was 7, my father walked into the bathroom and saw me looking at my face in the mirror. He slapped me, not with his whole strength, but hard, raging instantly. "What do you think you're looking at?" His hand cocked and ready. "What do you think you see?" "Nothing," I said. "Nothing is right." A carpenter, he worked furiously, already defeated, and never had enough money, as if permanently beyond reach some quantity of money existed that would have satisfied him. In the mornings he went to the job site hardened like cement into anger he barely knew he had. Sometimes he brought men from the taverns home with him at night. They carried transparent bottles of Miller High Life in paper bags and set them down on the table with a bang that said, "Men are here." My mother, who had returned from her secretary's job a few hours earlier, fed my brothers and me, washed the dishes, and put the 3 of us to bed while the men shouted and laughed in the kitchen. He was considered an excellent carpenter. He worked slowly, patiently, and I see now that he spent whatever love he had in the rented garage that was his workshop. In his spare time, he listened to baseball games on the radio. He had professional, but not personal, vanity, and he thought that a face like mine should not be examined. Because I saw Jimmy in the mirror, I thought my father, too, had seen him. One Saturday, my mother took the twins and me on the ferry across Lake Michigan to Saginaw. The point of the journey was the journey, and at Saginaw the boat docked for 20 minutes before wallowing back out into the lake and returning. With us were women like my mother, her friends, freed by the weekend from their jobs, some of them accompanied by men like my father, with their felt hats and baggy weekend trousers flaring over their weekend shoes. The women wore blood-bright lipstick that printed itself onto their cigarettes and smeared across their front teeth. They laughed a great deal and repeated the words that had made them laugh. Hot dog, slippin' and slidin', opera singer. 30 minutes after departure, the men disappeared into the enclosed deck bar. The women, my mother among them, arranged deck chairs into a long oval tied together by laughter, attention, gossip. They waved their cigarettes in the air. My brothers raced around the deck, their shirts flapping, their hair glued to their skulls with sweat. When they squabbled, my mother ordered them into empty deck chairs. I sat on the deck, leaning against the railings, quiet. If someone had asked me, "What do you want to do this afternoon? What do you want to do for the rest of your life?" I would have said, "I want to stay right here. I want to stay here forever." After a while, I stood up and left the women. I went across the deck and stepped through a hatch into the bar. Dark, deeply grained imitation wood covered the walls. The odors of beer and cigarettes and the sound of men's voices filled the enclosed space. About 20 men stood at the bar, talking and gesturing with half-filled glasses. Then one man broke away from the others with a flash of dirty blonde hair. I saw his shoulders move, and my scalp tingled, and my stomach froze, and I thought, Jimmy. Jimmy. But he turned all the way around, dipping his shoulders in some ecstasy of beer and male company, and I saw that he was a stranger, not Jimmy after all. I was thinking, someday when I am free, when I am out of this body and in some city whose name I do not even know now, I will remember this from beginning to end, and then I will be free of it. The women floated over the empty lake, laughing out clouds of cigarette smoke. The men, too, as boisterous as the children on the sticky asphalt playground, with its small green spray of glass like candy. In those days, I knew I was set apart from the rest of my family, an island between my parents and the twins. Those pairs that bracketed me slept in double beds in adjacent rooms at the back of the ground floor of the duplex owned by the blind man who lived above us. My bed, a cot coveted by the twins, stood in their room. An invisible line of great authority divided my territory and possessions from theirs. This is what happened in the mornings in our half of the duplex. My mother got up first. We heard her showering, heard drawers closing, the sounds of bowls and milk being set out on the table. The smell of bacon frying for my father, who banged on the door and called out my brother's names. "Don't you make me come in there now!" The noisy, puppyish turmoil of my brothers getting out of bed. All three of us scramble into the bathroom as soon as my father leaves it. The bathroom was steamy, heavy with the odor of shit and the more piercing, almost palpable smell of shaving, lather, and amputated whiskers. We all pee into the toilet at the same time. My mother frets and frets, pulling the twins into their clothes so that she can take them down the street to Mrs. Candy, who is given a $5 bill every week for taking care of them. I am supposed to be running back and forth on the playground in summer play school, supervised by two teenage girls who live a block away from us. I went to play school only twice. After I dress myself in clean underwear and socks and put on my everyday shirt and pants, I come into the kitchen while my father finishes his breakfast. He is eating strips of bacon and golden brown pieces of toast shiny with butter. A cigarette smolders in the ashtray before him. Everybody else has already left the house. My father and I can hear the blind man banging on the piano in his living room. I sit down before a bowl of cereal. My father looks at me, looks away. Angry at the blind man for banging at the piano this early in the morning, he is sweating already. His cheeks and forehead shine like the golden toast. My father glances at me, knowing he can postpone this no longer, and reaches wearily into his pocket and drops 2 quarters on the table. The high school girls charge 25 cents a day, and the other quarter is for my lunch. "Don't lose that money," he says as I take the coins. My father dumps coffee into his mouth, puts the cup and his plate into the crowded sink, looks at me again, pats his pockets for his keys, and says, "Close the door behind you." I tell him that I will close the door. He picks up his gray toolbox and his black lunch pail, claps his hat on his head, and goes out, banging his toolbox against the doorframe. It leaves a broad gray mark like a smear left by the passing of some angry creature's hide. Then I am alone in the house. I go back to the bedroom, close the door, and push a chair beneath the knob, and read Black Hawk and Henry and Captain Marvel comic books until at last it is time to go to the theater. While I read, everything in the house seems alive and dangerous. I can hear the telephone in the hall rattling on its hook, the radio clicking as it tries to turn itself on and talk to me. The dishes stir and chime in the sink. At these times, all objects, even the heavy chairs and sofa, become their true selves, violent as the fire that fills the sky I cannot see and races through the secret ways and passages beneath the streets. At these times, other people vanish like smoke. When I pull the chair away from the door, the house immediately goes quiet, like a wild animal feigning sleep. Everything inside and out slips cunningly back into place. The fires bank, men and women reappear on the sidewalks. I must open the door, and I do. I walk swiftly through the kitchen and the living room to the front door, knowing that if I look too carefully at any one thing, I will wake it up again. My mouth is so dry my tongue feels fat. "I'm leaving," I say to no one. Everything in the house hears me. The quarter goes through the slot at the bottom of the window. The ticket leaps from its slot. For a long time, before Jimmy, I thought that unless you kept your stub unfolded and safe in a shirt pocket, The usher could rush down the aisle in the middle of the movie, seize you, and throw you out. So into the pocket it goes, and I slip through the big doors into the cool, cross the lobby, and pass through a swinging door with a porthole window. Most of the regular daytime patrons of the Orpheum Oriental sit in the same seats every day. I am one of those who comes here every day. A small, talkative gathering of bums sits far to the right of the theater, in the rows beneath the sconces fastened like bronze torches to the walls. The bums choose these seats so that they can examine their bits of paper, their documents, and show them to each other during the movies. Always on their minds is the possibility that they might have lost one of these documents, and they frequently consult the tattered envelopes in which they are kept. I take the end seat, left side of the central block of seats, just before the broad horizontal middle aisle. There I can stretch out. At other times I sit in the middle of the last row, or the first. Sometimes when the balcony is open, I go up and sit in its first row. From the first row of the balcony, seeing a movie is like being a bird and flying down into the movie from above. To be alone in the theater is delicious. The curtains hang heavy, red, anticipatory. The mock torches glow on the walls. Swirls of gilt wind through the red paint. On days when I sit near a wall, I reach out toward the red, which seems warm and soft, and find my fingers resting on a chill dampness. The carpet of the Orpheum Oriental must once have been a bottomlessly rich brown. Now it is a dark non-color, mottled with the pink and gray smears, like melted Band-Aids, of chewing gum. From about a third of the seats, dirty gray wool foams from slashes in the worn plush. On an ideal day, I sit through a cartoon, a travelogue, a sequence of previews, a movie, another cartoon, and another movie before anyone else enters the theater. This whole cycle is as satisfying as a meal. On other mornings, old women in odd hats and young women wearing scarves over their rollers, a few teenage couples, are scattered throughout the theater when I come in. None of these people ever pays attention to anything but the screen and, in the case of the teenagers, each other. Once, a man in his early 20s, hair like a haystack, sat up in the wide middle aisle when I took my seat. He groaned. Rusty-looking dried blood was spattered over his chin and his dirty white shirt. He groaned again and then got to his hands and knees. The carpet beneath him was spotted with what looked like 1,000 red dots. The young man stumbled to his feet and began reeling up the aisle. A bright, depthless pane of sunlight surrounded him before he vanished into it. At the beginning of July, I told my mother that the high school girls had increased the hours of the play school because I wanted to be sure of seeing both features twice before I had to go home. After that, I could learn the rhythms of the theater itself, which did not impress themselves upon me all at once, but revealed themselves gradually, so that by the middle of the first week, I knew when the bums would begin to move toward the seats beneath the sconces. They usually arrived on Tuesdays and Fridays shortly after 11 o'clock, when the liquor store down the block opened up to provide them with the pints and half-pints that nourished them. By the end of the second week, I knew when the ushers left the interior of the theater to sit on padded benches in the lobby and light up their Luckies and Chesterfields, when the old men and women would begin to appear. By the end of the third week, I felt like the merest part of a great, orderly machine. Before the beginning of the second showing of Beautiful Hawaii or Curiosities Down Under, I went out to the counter and with my second quarter purchased a box of popcorn or a packet of Good and Plenty candy. In a movie theater, nothing is random except the customers and hitches in the machine. Film strips break and lights fail. The projectionist gets drunk or falls asleep, and the screen presents a blank yellow face to the stamping, whistling audience. These inconsistencies are summer squalls, forgotten as soon as they have ended. The occasion for the lights, the projectionist, the boxes of popcorn and packets of candy, the movies enlarged when seen over and over. The truth gradually came to me that this deepening and widening out, this enlarging, was why movies were shown over and over all day long. The machine revealed itself most surely in the exact, limpid repetitions of the actors' words and gestures as they moved through the story. When Alan Ladd asked Blackie Francho, the dying gangster, "Who did it, Blackie?" his voice widened like a river, grew sandier with an almost unconcealed tenderness I had to learn to hear, the voice within the speaking voice. Chicago Deadline was the exploration by a newspaper reporter named Ed Adams, Alan Ladd, of the tragedy of a mysterious young woman, Rosita Gendreau, who had died alone of tuberculosis in a shabby hotel room. The reporter soon learns that she had many names, many identities. She had been in love with an architect, a gangster, a crippled professor, a boxer, a millionaire, and had given a different facet of her being to each of them. Far too predictably, the adult me complains, the obsessed Ed falls in love with Rosita. When I was 7, little was predictable. I had not yet seen Laura, and I saw a man driven by the need to understand, which became identical to the need to protect. Rosita Gendreau was the embodiment of memory, which was mystery. Through the sequences of her identities, the various selves shown to brother, boxer, millionaire, gangster, all the others, her memory kept her whole. I saw twice a day for 2 weeks before and during Jimmy, the machine deep within the machine. Love and memory were the same. Both love and memory accommodated us to death. I did not understand this, but I saw it. The reporter, Alan Ladd, with his dirty blonde hair, his perfect jawline, and brilliant, wounded smile, gave her life by making her memory his own. "I think you're the only one who ever understood her," Arthur Kennedy, Rosita's brother, tells Alan Ladd. Most of the world demands the kick of sensation. Most of the world must gather and spend money, hunt for easier and more temporary forms of love, must feed itself, sell newspapers, destroy the enemy's plots with plots of its own. "I don't know what you want," Ed Adams says to the editor of the Journal. "You got 2 murders. "And a mystery woman," I say along with him. His voice is tough and detached, the voice of a wounded man acting. The man beside me laughs. Unlike his normal voice, his laughter is breathless and high-pitched. It is the second showing today of Chicago Deadline, early afternoon. After the next showing of At War with the Army, I will have to walk up the aisle and out of the theater. It will be 20 minutes to 5, and the sun will still burn high over the cream-colored buildings across wide, empty Sherman Boulevard. I met the man, or he met me, at the candy counter. He was, at first, only a tall presence, blond, dressed in dark clothing. I cared nothing for him. He did not matter. He was vague even when he spoke. "Good popcorn." I looked up at him, narrow blue eyes, bad teeth smiling at me, stubble on his face. I looked away, and the uniformed man behind the counter handed me popcorn. "Good for you, I mean. Good stuff in popcorn. Comes right out of the ground. Grows on big plants tall as I am, just like other corn. You know that?" When I said nothing, he laughed and spoke to the man behind the counter. He didn't know that. The kid thought popcorn grew inside poppers. The counterman turned away. "You come here a lot?" the man asked me. I put a few kernels of popcorn in my mouth and turned toward him. He was showing me his bad teeth. "You do," he said. "You come here a lot." I nodded. "Every day?" I nodded again. "And we tell little fibs at home about what we've been doing all day, don't we?" he asked, and pursed his lips and raised his eyes like a comic butler in a movie. Then his mood shifted and everything about him became serious. He was looking at me, but he did not see me. "You got a favorite actor?" "I got a favorite actor. Alan Ladd." And I both saw and understood, that he thought he looked like Alan Ladd. He did, too, at least a little bit. When I saw the resemblance, he seemed like a different person, more glamorous. Glamour surrounded him as though he were acting, impersonating a shabby young man with stained, irregular teeth. "The name's Frank," he said, and stuck out his hand. "Shake?" I took his hand. "Real good popcorn," he said, and stuck his hand into the box. "Want to hear a secret?" A secret. I was born twice. The first time I died. It was on an army base. Everybody told me I should have joined the Navy, and everybody was right. So I just had myself get born somewhere else. Hey, the Army's not for everybody, you know. He grinned down at me. "Now I told you my secret. Let's go in. I'll sit with you. Everybody needs company, and I like you. You look like a good kid." He followed me back to my seat and sat down beside me. When I quoted the lines along with the actors, he laughed. Then he leaned toward me and said, he leaned toward me, breathing sour wine over me, and took, "No." "I was just kidding out there," he said. "Frank ain't my real name. Well, it was my name. Before. See? Frank used to be my name for a while. But now my good friends call me Stan. I like that. Stanley the Steamer. Big Stan. Stan the Man. See? It works real good. "You'll never be a carpenter," he told me. "You'll never be anything like that because you got that look. I used to have that look, okay? So I know. I know about you just by looking at you." He said he had been a clerk at Sears. After that, he had worked as the custodian for a couple of apartment buildings owned by a guy who used to be a friend of his but was no longer. Then he had been the janitor at the high school where my grade school sent its graduates. "Good old booze got me fired. Story of my life," he said. "Tight-ass bitches caught me drinking down in the basement, in a room I used there, and threw me out without a fare thee well. Hey, that was my room, my place. The best things in the world can do the worst things to you. You'll find that out someday. And when you go to that school, I hope you'll remember what they done to me there." These days he was resting. He hung around. He went to the movies. He said, "You got something special in you. Guys like me were funny. We can tell." We sat together through the second feature, Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis, comfortable and laughing. "Those guys are bigger bums than us," he said. I thought of Paul backed up against the school in his enveloping red shirt, imprisoned within his inability to be like anyone around him. "You coming back tomorrow? If I get here, I'll check around for you. Hey, trust me. I know who you are. You know that little thing you pee with?" Leaning sideways and whispering into my ear, "That's the best thing a man's got. Trust me." The big Providential Park near our house, 2 streets past the Orpheum Oriental, is separated into 3 different areas. Nearest the wide iron gates on Sherman Boulevard, through which we enter, was a wading pool divided by a low green hedge, so rubbery it seemed artificial, from a playground with a climbing frame, swings, and a row of seesaws. When I was a child of 2 and 3, I splashed in the warm pool and clung to the chains of the swings, making myself go higher and higher, terror and joy and grim duty so woven together that no one could pull them apart. Beyond the children's pool and playground was the zoo. My mother walked my brothers and me to the playground and wading pool and sat smoking on a bench while we played. Both of my parents took us into the zoo. An elephant extended his trunk to my father's palm and delicately lipped peanuts toward his maw. The giraffe stretched toward the constantly diminishing supply of leaves, ever fewer and higher, above his cage. The lions drowsed on amputated branches and paced behind the bars, staring out not at what was there, but at the long, grassy plains imprinted on their memories. I knew the lions had the power not to see us, to look straight through us to Africa. But when they saw you instead of Africa, they looked right into your bones. They saw the blood traveling through your body. The lions were golden brown, patient, green-eyed. They recognized me and could read thoughts. The lions neither liked nor disliked me. They did not miss me during their long weekdays, but they took me into the circle of known beings. You shouldn't have looked at me like that, June Havoc, Leona, tells Ed Adams. She does not mean it. Not at all. Past the zoo and across a narrow park road down which khaki-clothed park attendants pushed barrows heavy with flowers, stood a wide, unexpected lawn bordered with flower beds and tall elms, open space hidden like a secret between the caged animals and the elm trees. Only my father brought me to this section of the park. Here he tried to make a baseball player of me. "Get the bat off your shoulders," he says. "For God's sake, will you try to hit the ball anyhow?" When I fail once again to swing at his slow, perfect pitch, he spins around, raises his arm, and theatrically asks everyone in sight, "Whose kid is this anyway? Can you answer me that?" He has never asked me about the play school I am supposed to be attending, and I have never told him about the Orpheum Oriental. I will never come any closer to talking to him than now, for Stanley the steamer, has told me things that cannot be true, that must be inventions and fables, part of the world of children wandering lost in the forest, of talking cats and silver boots filled with blood. In this world, dismembered children buried beneath juniper trees can rise and speak, made whole once again. Fables boil with underground explosions and hidden fires, and for this reason, memory rejects them, thrusts them out of its sight, and they must be repeated over and over. I cannot remember Stan's face, cannot even be sure I remember what he said. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis are bums like us. I am certain of only one thing. Tomorrow I am again going to see my newest, scariest, most interesting friend. "When I was your age," my father says, "I had my heart set on playing pro ball when I grew up. And you're too damned scared or lazy to even take the bat off your shoulder. Christ! I can't stand looking at you anymore." He turns around and begins to move quickly toward the narrow park road and the zoo, going home, and I run after him. I retrieve the softball when he tosses it into the bushes. "What the hell do you think you're going to do when you grow up?" my father asks, his eyes still fixed ahead of him. "I wonder what you think life is all about. I wouldn't give you a job. I wouldn't trust you around carpenter tools. I wouldn't trust you to blow your nose right, to tell you the truth. I wonder if the hospital mixed up the goddamn babies." I follow him, dragging the bat with one hand, in the other cradling the softball in the pouch of my mitt. At dinner, my mother asks if summer play school is fun, and I say yes. I have already taken from my father's dresser drawer what Stan asked me to get for him, and it burns in my pocket as if it were a light. I want to ask, is it actually true and not a story? Does the worst thing always have to be the true thing? Of course, I cannot ask this. My father does not know about worse things. He sees what he wants to see, or he tries so hard he thinks he does see it. "I guess he'll hit a long ball someday. The boy just needs more work on his swing." He tries to smile at me, a boy who will someday learn to hit a long ball. The knife is upended in his fist. He is about to smear a pat of butter on his steak. He does not see me at all. My father is not a lion. He cannot make the switch to seeing what is really there in front of him. Late at night, Alan Ladd knelt beside my bed. He was wearing a neat gray suit, and his breath smelled like cloves. "You okay, son?" I nodded. "I just wanted to tell you that I like seeing you out there every day. That means a lot to me." "Do you remember what I was telling you about?" And I knew. It was true. He had said those things, and he would repeat them like a fairy tale, and the world was going to change because it would be seen through changed eyes. I felt sick, trapped in the theater as if in a cage. "You think about what I told you?" "Sure," I said. "That's good. Hey, you know what? I feel like changing seats. You want to change seats too?" "Where to?" He tilted his head back, and I knew he wanted to move to the last row. "Come on. I want to show you something." We changed seats. For a long time we sat watching the movie from the last row, nearly alone in the theater. Just after 11, 3 of the bums filed in and proceeded to their customary seats on the other side of the theater. A rumpled graybeard I had seen many times before, a fat man with a stubby, squashed face, also familiar, and one of the shaggy, wild-looking young men who hung around the bums until they became indistinguishable from them. They began passing a flat brown bottle back and forth. After a second, I remembered the young man. I had surprised him awake one morning, passed out and spattered with blood in the middle aisle. Then I wondered if Stan was not the young man I had surprised that morning. They looked as alike as twins, though I knew they were not. "Want a sip?" Stan said, showing me his own pint bottle. "Do you good." Bravely, feeling privileged and adult, I took the bottle of Thunderbird and raised it to my mouth. I wanted to like it, to share the pleasure of it with Stan. But it tasted horrible, like garbage, and the little bit I swallowed burned all the way down my throat. I made a face, and he said, "This stuff's really not so bad. Only one thing in the world can make you feel better than this stuff." He placed his hand on my thigh and squeezed. "I'm giving you a head start, you know, just because I liked you the first time I saw you." He leaned over and stared at me. "You believe me? You believe the things I tell you?" I said I guessed so. "I got proof. I'll show you it's true. Want to see my proof?" When I said nothing, Stan leaned closer to me, inundating me with the stench of Thunderbird. "You know that little thing you pee with? Remember how I told you how it gets real big when you're about 13? Remember I told you about how incredible that feels? Well, you have to trust Stan now, because Stan's going to trust you." He put his face right beside my ear. "Then I'll tell you another secret." He lifted his hand from my thigh and closed it around mine and pulled my hand down onto his crotch. "Feel anything?" I nodded, but I could not have described what I felt any more than the blind men could describe the elephant. Stan smiled tightly and tugged at his zipper in a way even I could tell was nervous. He reached inside his pants, fumbled, and pulled out a thick, pale club that looked like nothing human. I was so frightened I thought I would throw up, and I looked back up at the screen. Invisible chains held me to my seat. "See? Now you understand me." Then he noticed I was not looking at him. "Kid, look!" I said look. "It's not going to hurt you." I could not look down at him. I saw nothing. "Come on. Touch it. See what it feels like." I shook my head. "Let me tell you something. I like you a lot. I think the two of us are friends. This thing we're doing, it's unusual to you because this is the first time. But people do this all the time. Your mommy and daddy do it all the time, but they just don't tell you about it. We're pals, aren't we?" I nodded dumbly. On the screen, Barry Kroger was telling Alan Ladd, "Drop it. Forget it. She's poison." Well, this is what friends do when they really like each other, like your mommy and daddy. Look at this thing, will you? Come on. Did my mommy and daddy like each other? He squeezed my shoulder, and I looked. Now the thing had folded up into itself and was drooping sideways against the fabric of his trousers. Almost as soon as I looked, it twitched and began to push itself out like the slide of a trombone. "There," he said. "He likes you. You got him going. Tell me you like him, too." Terror would not let me speak. My brains had turned to powder. "I know what. Let's call him Jimmy. We'll say his name is Jimmy. Now that you've been introduced, say hi to Jimmy." "Hi, Jimmy," I said, and despite my terror, could not keep myself from giggling. "Now go on. Touch him." I slowly extended my hand and put the tips of my fingers on Jimmy. "Pet him. Jimmy wants you to pet him." I tapped my fingertips against Jimmy 2 or 3 times, and he twitched up another few degrees, as rigid as a surfboard. "Slide your fingers up and down on him." If I run, I thought, he'll catch me and kill me. If I don't do what he says, he'll kill me. I rubbed my fingertips back and forth, moving the thin skin over the veins. Can't you imagine Jimmy going in a woman? Now you can see what you'll be like when you're a man. Keep on, but hold him with your whole hand, and give me what I asked you for. I immediately took my hand from Jimmy and pulled my father's clean white handkerchief from my back pocket. He took the handkerchief with his left hand, and with his right guided mine back to Jimmy. "You're doing really great," he whispered. In my hand, Jimmy felt warm and slightly gummy. I could not join my fingers around its width. My head was buzzing. "Is Jimmy your secret?" I was able to say. "My secret comes later." "Can I stop now?" "I'll cut you into little pieces if you do," he said, and when I froze, he stroked my hair and whispered, "Hey, can't you tell when a guy's kidding around? I'm really happy with you right now. You're the best kid in the world. You'd want this too if you knew how good it felt." After what seemed an endless time, while Alan Ladd was climbing out of a taxicab, Stan abruptly arched his back, grimaced, and whispered, "Look!" His entire body jerked, and too startled to let go, I held Jimmy and watched thick, ivory-colored milk spurt and drool almost unendingly onto the handkerchief. An odor utterly foreign, but as familiar as the toilet or the lake shore, rose from the thick milk. Stan sighed, folded the handkerchief, and pushed the softening Jimmy back into his trousers. He leaned over and kissed the top of my head. I think I nearly fainted. I felt lightly, pointlessly dead. I could still feel him pulsing in my palm and fingers. When it was time for me to go home, he told me his secret. His own real name was Jimmy, not Stan. He had been saving his real name until he knew he could trust me. "Tomorrow," he said, touching my cheek with his fingers, "we'll see each other again tomorrow. But you don't have anything to worry about. I trust you enough to give you my real name. You trusted me not to hurt you, and I didn't. We have to trust each other not to say anything about this, or both you and me'll be in a lot of trouble." "I won't say anything," I said. "I love you. I love you. Yes, I do." "Now we're a secret," he said, folding the handkerchief into quarters and putting it back in my pocket. A lot of love has to be secret, especially when a boy and a man are getting to know each other and learning how to make each other happy and be good, loving friends. Not many people can understand that, so the friendship has to be protected. When you walk out of here, he said, you have to forget that this happened. Otherwise, people will try to hurt us both. Afterward, I remembered only the confusion of Chicago Deadline, how the story had abruptly surged forward, skipping over whole characters and entire scenes, how for long stretches the actors had moved their lips without speaking. I could see Alan Ladd stepping out of the taxicab, looking straight through the screen into my eyes, knowing me. My mother said that I looked pale, and my father said that I didn't get enough exercise. The twins looked up from their plates, then went back to spooning macaroni and cheese into their mouths. "Were you ever in Chicago?" I asked my father, who asked what was it to me. "Did you ever meet a movie actor?" I asked, and he said, "This kid must have a fever." The twins giggled. Alan Ladd and Donna Reed came into my bedroom together late that night, moving with brisk, cool theatricality, and kneeled down beside my cot. They smiled at me. Their voices were very soothing. "I saw you missed a few things today," Alan said. "Nothing to worry about. I'll take care of you." "I know," I said. "I'm your #1 fan." Then the door cracked open and my mother put her head inside the room. Alan and Donna smiled and stood up to let her pass between them and the cot. I missed them the second they stepped back. "Still awake?" I nodded. "Are you feeling all right, honey?" I nodded again, afraid that Alan and Donna would leave if she stayed too long. "I have a surprise for you," she said. "The Saturday after this, I'm taking you and the twins all the way across Lake Michigan on the ferry. There's a whole bunch of us. It'll be a lot of fun." "Good. That's nice. I'll like that." I thought about you all last night and all this morning. When I came into the lobby, he was leaning forward on one of the padded benches where the ushers sat and smoked, his elbows on his knees and his chin in his hand, watching the door. The metal tip of a flat bottle protruded from his side pocket. Beside him was a package rolled up in brown paper. He winked at me, jerked his head toward the door into the theater, stood up and went inside in an elaborate charade of not being with me. I knew he would be just inside the door, sitting in the middle of the last row, waiting for me. I gave my ticket to the bored usher, who tore it in half and handed over the stub. I knew exactly what had happened yesterday, just as if I had never forgotten any of it, and my insides began shaking. All of the colors of the lobby, the red and the shabby gilt, seemed much brighter than I remembered them. I could smell the popcorn in the case and the oily butter heating in the machine. My legs moved me over a mile of sizzling brown carpet and past the candy counter. Jimmy's hair gleamed in the empty, darkening theater. When I took the seat next to him, he ruffled my hair and grinned down and said he had been thinking about me all night and all morning. The package in brown paper was a sandwich for my lunch. A kid had to eat more than popcorn. The lights went all the way down as the series of curtains opened over the screen. Loud music, beginning in the middle of a note, suddenly jumped from the speakers, and the Tom and Jerry cartoon, Bulldozing, began. When I leaned back, Jimmy put his arm around me. I felt sweaty and cold at the same time, and my insides were still shaking. I suddenly realized that part of me was glad to be in this place, and I shocked myself with the knowledge that all morning I had been looking forward to this moment as much as I had been dreading it. "You want your sandwich now?" "It's liver sausage because that's my personal favorite." I said no thanks, I'd wait until the first movie was over. "Okay," he said, "just as long as you eat it." Then he said, "Look at me." His face was right above mine, and he looked like Alan Ladd's twin brother. "You have to know something," he said. "You're the best kid I ever met. Ever." The man squeezed me up against his chest and into a dizzying funk of sweat and dirt and wine, along with a trace, imagined, of that other, more animal odor that had come from him yesterday. Then he released me. "You want me to play with your little Jimmy today?" "No." "Too small, anyhow," he said with a laugh. He was in perfect good humor. "Bet you wish it was the same size as mine." That wish terrified me, and I shook my head. "Today we're just going to watch the movies together," he said. "I'm not greedy." Except for when one of the ushers came up the aisle, we sat like that all day, his arm around my shoulder, the back of my neck resting in the hollow of his elbow. When the credits for At War with the Army rolled up the screen, I felt as though I had fallen asleep and missed everything. I couldn't believe that it was time to go home. Jimmy tightened his arm around me and, in a voice full of amusement, said, "Touch me." I looked up into his face. "Go on," he said. "I want you to do that little thing for me." I prodded his fly with my index finger. Jimmy wobbled under the pressure of my fingers, seeming as long as my arm, and for a second of absolute wretchedness, I saw the other children running up and down the school playground behind the girls from the next block. "Go on," he said. "Trust me," he said, investing Jimmy with an identity more concentrated, more focused than his own. Jimmy wanted to talk, to speak his piece, was hungry, was dying for a kiss. All these words meant the same thing. Trust me. I trust you, so you must trust me. Have I ever hurt you? No. Didn't I give you a sandwich? Yes. Don't I love you? You know I won't tell your parents what you do. As long as you keep coming here, I won't tell your parents anything, because I won't have to. See? And you love me too, don't you? There. You see how much I love you? I dreamed that I lived underground in a wooden room. I dreamed that my parents roamed the upper world, calling out my name and weeping because the animals had captured and eaten me. I dreamed that I was buried beneath a juniper tree, and the cut-off pieces of my body called out to each other and wept because they were separate. I dreamed that I ran down a dark forest path toward my parents, and when I finally reached the small clearing where they sat before a bright fire, my mother was Donna, and Alan was my father. I dreamed that I could remember everything that was happening to me, every second of it, and that when the teacher called on me in class, when my mother came into my room at night, when the policeman went past me as I walked down Sherman Boulevard, I had to spill it out. But when I tried to speak, I could not remember what it was that I remembered, only that there was something to remember. And so I walked again and again toward my beautiful parents in the clearing, repeating myself like a fable, like the jokes of the women on the ferry. Don't I love you? Don't I show you? Can't you tell that I love you? Yes. Don't you? Can't you love me too? He stares at me as I stare at the movie. He could see me the way I could see him, with his eyes closed. He has me memorized. He has stroked my hair, my face, my body into his memory, stroke after stroke, stealing me from myself. Eventually, he took me in his mouth, and his mouth memorized me too, and I knew he wanted me to place my hands on that dirty blonde head resting so hugely in my lap, but I could not touch his head. I thought, I have already forgotten this. I want to die. I am dead already. Only death can make this not have happened. When you grow up, I bet you'll be in the movies, and I'll be your #1 fan. By the weekend, those days at the Orpheum Oriental seemed to have been spent underwater or underground. The spiny anteater, the lyrebird, the kangaroo, the Tasmanian devil, the nun bat, and the frilled lizard were creatures found only in Australia. Australia was the world's smallest continent, its largest island. It was cut off from the Earth's great land masses. Beautiful girls with blonde hair strutted across Australian beaches, and Australian Christmases were hot and sun-baked. Everybody went outside and waved at the camera, exchanging presents from lawn chairs. The middle of Australia, its heart and gut, was a desert. Australian boys excelled at sports. Tom Cat loves Jerry Mouse, though he plotted again and again to murder him. And Jerry Mouse loved Tom Cat, though to save his life he had to run so fast he burned a track through the carpet. Jimmy loved me, and he would be gone some day, and then I would miss him a lot. Wouldn't I? Say you'll miss me. I'll miss. I think I'd go crazy without you. When you're all grown up, will you remember me? Each time I walked back out past the usher, who stood tearing in half the tickets of the people just entering, handing them the stubs, every time I pushed open the door and walked out onto the heat-filled sidewalk of Sherman Boulevard and saw the sun on the buildings across the street, I lost my hold on what had happened inside the darkness of the theater. I didn't know what I wanted. I had 2 murders and My right hand felt as though I had been holding a smaller child's sticky hand very tightly between my palm and fingers. If I lived in Australia, I would have blonde hair like Alan Ladd and run forever across tan beaches on Christmas Day. I walked through high school in my sleep, reading novels, daydreaming in classes I did not like, but earning spuriously good grades. In the middle of my senior year, Brown University gave me a full scholarship. 2 years later, I amazed and disappointed all my old teachers and my parents' friends by dropping out of school shortly before I would have failed all my courses but English and history, in which I was getting A's. I was certain that no one could teach anyone else how to write. I knew exactly what I was going to do, and all I would miss of college was the social life. For 5 years, I lived inexpensively in Providence, supporting myself by stacking books in the school library and by petty thievery. I wrote when I was not working or listening to the local bands. Then I destroyed what I had written and wrote it again. In this way, I saw myself to the end of a novel, like walking through a park one way and then walking backward and forward through the same park over and over until every nick on every swing, every tawny hair on every lion's hide had been witnessed and made to gleam or allowed to sink back into the importunate field of details from which it had been lifted. When this novel was rejected by the publisher to whom I sent it, I moved to New York City and began another novel while I rewrote the first all over again at night. During this period, an almost impersonal happiness, like the happiness of a stranger, lay beneath everything I did. I wrapped parcels of books at the Strand bookstore. For a short time, no more than a few months, I lived on shredded wheat and peanut butter. When my first book was accepted, I moved from a single room on the Lower East Side into another, larger single room, a studio apartment on 9th Avenue in Chelsea, where I continue to live. My apartment is just large enough for my wooden desk, a convertible couch, 2 large crowded bookshelves, a shelf of stereo equipment, and dozens of cardboard boxes of records. In this apartment, everything has its place and is in it. My parents have never been to this enclosed, tidy space, though I speak to my father on the phone every 2 or 3 months. In the past 10 years, I have returned to the city where I grew up only once to visit my mother in the hospital after her stroke. During the 4 days I stayed in my father's house, I slept in my old room. My father slept upstairs. After the blind man's death, my father bought the duplex. On my first night home, he told me that we were both successes. Now, when we speak on the telephone, he tells me of the fortunes of the local baseball and basketball teams and respectfully inquires about my progress on the new book. I think, this is not my father. He is not the same man. My old cot disappeared long ago, and late at night I lay on the twins' double bed. Like the house as a whole, like everything in my old neighborhood, the bedroom was larger than I remembered it. I brushed the wallpaper with my fingers, then looked up to the ceiling. The image of two men tangled up in the ropes of the same parachute, comically berating each other as they fell, came to me, and I wondered if the image had a place in the novel I was writing, or if it was a gift from the as-yet unseen novel that would follow it. I could hear the floor creak as my father paced upstairs in the blind man's former territory. My inner weather changed, and I began brooding about May Levitt, whom 15 years earlier at Brown I had known as May Chung. Divorced, an editor at a paperback firm, she had called to congratulate me after my second novel was favorably reviewed in the Times, and on this slim but well-intentioned foundation we began to construct a long and troubled love affair. Back in the surroundings of my childhood, I felt profoundly uneasy, having spent the day beside my mother's hospital bed without knowing if she understood or even recognized me, and I thought of May with sudden longing. I wanted her in my arms, and I yearned for my purposeful, orderly, dreaming adult life in New York. I wanted to call May, but it was past midnight in the Midwest, an hour later in New York, and May, no owl, would have gone to bed hours earlier. Then I remembered my mother lying stricken in the narrow hospital bed, and suffered a spasm of guilt for thinking about my lover. For a deluded moment I imagined that it was my duty to move back into the house and see if I could bring my mother back to life, while I did what I could for my retired father. At that moment I remembered, as I often did, an orange-haired boy enveloped in a red wool shirt. Sweat poured from my forehead, my chest. Then a terrifying thing happened to me. I tried to get out of bed to go to the bathroom and found that I could not move. My arms and legs were cast in cement. They were lifeless and would not move. I thought that I was having a stroke, like my mother. I could not even cry out. My throat, too, was paralyzed. I strained to push myself up off the double bed and smelled that someone very near, someone just out of sight or around the corner, was making popcorn and heating butter. Another wave of sweat gouted out of my inert body, turning the sheet and the pillowcase slick and cold. I saw, as if I were writing it, my 7-year-old self hesitating before the entrance of a theater a few blocks from this house. Hot, flat, yellow sunlight fell over everything, cooking the life from the wide boulevard. I saw myself turn away, felt my stomach churn with the smoke of underground fires, saw myself begin to run. Vomit backed up in my throat. My arms and legs convulsed, and I fell out of bed and managed to crawl out of the room and down the hall to throw up in the toilet behind the closed door of the bathroom. My age, as I write these words, is 43. I have written 5 novels over a period of nearly 20 years. Only 5, each of them more difficult, harder to write than the one before. To maintain this hobbled pace of a novel every 4 years, I must sit at my desk at least 6 hours every day. I must consume hundreds of boxes of typing paper, scores of yellow legal pads, forests of pencils, miles of black ribbon. It is a fierce, voracious activity. Every sentence must be tested 3 or 4 ways, made to clear fences like a horse. The purpose of every sentence is to be an arrow into the secret center of the book. To find my way into the secret center, I must hold the entire book, every detail and rhythm, in my memory. This comprehensive act of memory is the most crucial task of my life. My books get flattering reviews, which usually seem to describe other, more linear novels, and they win occasional awards. I am one of those writers whose advances are funded by the torrents of money spun off by bestsellers. Lately, I have had the impression that the general perception of me, to the extent that such a thing exists, is that of a hermetic painter inscribing hundreds of tiny, grotesque, fantastical details over every inch of a large canvas. My books are unfashionably long. I teach writing at various colleges, give occasional lectures, am modestly enriched by grants. This is enough. More than enough. Now and then I am both dismayed and amused to discover that a young writer I have met at a pen reception or a workshop regards my life with envy. Envy misses the point completely. "If you were going to give me one piece of advice," a young woman at a conference asked me, "I mean real advice, not just the obvious stuff about keeping on writing, what would it be? What would you tell me to do?" "I won't tell you, but I'll write it out," I said, and picked up one of the conference flyers and printed a few words on its back. "Don't read this until you are out of the room," I said, and watched while she folded the flyer into her bag. What I had printed on the back of the flyer was, "Go to a lot of movies." On the Sunday after the ferry trip, I could not hit a single ball in the park. My eyes kept closing, and as soon as my eyelids came down, visions started up like movies, quick, automatic dreams. My arms seemed too heavy to lift. After I had trudged home behind my dispirited father, I collapsed on the sofa and slept straight through dinner. In a dream, a spacious box confined me, and I drew colored pictures of elm trees, the sun, wide fields, mountains, and rivers on its walls. At dinner, loud noises, never scarce around the twins, made me jump. "That kid's not right, I swear to you," my father said. When my mother asked if I wanted to go to play school on Monday, my stomach closed up like a fist. "I have to," I said. "I'm really fine. I have to go." Sentences rolled from my mouth meaning nothing, or meaning the wrong thing. For a moment of confusion, I thought that I really was going to the playground and saw black asphalt, deep as a field, where a few children, diminished by perspective, clustered at the far end. I went to bed right after dinner. My mother pulled down the shades, turned off the light, and finally left me alone. From above came the sound, like a beast's approximation of music, of random notes struck on a piano. I knew only that I was scared, not why. The next day I had to go to a certain place, but I could not think where until my fingers recalled the velvety plush of the end seat on the middle aisle. Then black and white images full of intentional menace came to me from the previews I had seen for 2 weeks. The Hitchhiker, starring Edmund O'Brien. The spiny anteater and nun bat were animals found only in Australia. I longed for Alan Ladd, Ed Adams, to walk into the room with his reporter's notebook and pencil, and knew that I had something to remember without knowing what it was. After a long time, the twins cascaded into the bedroom, undressed, put on pajamas, brushed their teeth. The front door slammed. My father had gone out to the taverns. In the kitchen, my mother ironed shirts and talked to herself in a familiar, rancorous voice. The twins went to sleep. I heard my mother put away the ironing board and walk down the hall to the living room. I saw Ed Adams calmly walking up and down on the sidewalk outside our house, as handsome as a god in his neat gray suit. Ed went all the way to the end of the block, put a cigarette in his mouth, and leaned into a sudden round flare of brightness before exhaling smoke and walking away. I knew I had fallen asleep only when the front door slammed for the second time that night and woke me up. In the morning, my father struck his fist against the bedroom door, and the twins jumped out of bed and began yelling around the bedroom, instantly filled with energy. As in a cartoon, into the bathroom drifted tendrils of the odor of frying bacon. My brothers jostled toward the bathroom. Water rushed into the sink and the toilet bowl, and my mother hurried in, her face tightened down over her cigarette, and began yanking the twins into their clothes. "You made your decision," she said to me. "Now I hope you're going to make it to the playground on time." Doors opened, doors slammed shut. My father shouted from the kitchen, and I got out of bed. Eventually, I sat down before the bowl of cereal. My father smoked and did not meet my eyes. The cereal tasted of dead leaves. "You look the way that asshole upstairs plays piano," my father said. He dropped quarters on the table and told me not to lose that money. After he left, I locked myself in the bedroom. The piano dully resounded overhead like a soundtrack. I heard the cups and dishes rattle in the sink, the furniture moving by itself, looking for something to hunt down and kill. Love me," the radio called from beside a family of brown and white porcelain spaniels. I heard some light, whispery thing, a lamp or a magazine, begin to slide around the living room. "I am imagining all this," I said to myself, and tried to concentrate on a Black Hawk comic book. The pictures jigged and melted in their panels. "Love me," Black Hawk cried out from the cockpit of his fighter as he swooped down to exterminate a nest of yellow, slant-eyed villains. Outside, fire raged beneath the streets, trying to pull the world apart. When I dropped the comic book and closed my eyes, the noises ceased, and I could hear the hovering stillness of perfect attention. Even Black Hawk, belted into his airplane within the comic book, was listening to what I was doing. In thick, hazy sunlight, I went down Sherman Boulevard toward the Orpheum Oriental. Around me, the world was motionless, frozen like a frame in a comic strip. After a time, I noticed that the cars on the boulevard and the few people on the sidewalk had not actually frozen into place, but instead were moving with great slowness. I could see men's legs advancing within their trousers, the knee coming forward to strike the crease, the cuff slowly lifting off the shoe drifting up like Tom Cat's paw when he crept toward Jerry Mouse. The warm, patched skin of Sherman Boulevard. I thought of walking along Sherman Boulevard forever, moving past the nearly immobile cars and people, past the theater, past the liquor store, through the gates and past the wading pool and swings, past the elephants and lions reaching out to be fed, past the secret park where my father flailed in a rage of disappointment, past the elms and out the opposite gate, past the big houses on the opposite side of the park, past picture windows and past lawns with bikes and plastic pools, past slanting driveways and basketball hoops, past men getting out of cars, past playgrounds where children raced back and forth on a surface shining black. Then past fields and crowded markets, past high yellow tractors with mud dried like old wool inside the enormous hubs, past eloquent cats and fearful lions on wagons piled high with hay, past deep woods where lost children followed trails of breadcrumbs to a gingerbread door, past other cities where nobody would see me because nobody knew my name, past everything, past everybody. At the Orpheum Oriental, I stopped still. My mouth was dry and my eyes would not focus. Everything around me, so quiet and still a moment earlier, jumped into life as soon as I stopped walking. Horns blared, cars roared down the boulevard. Beneath these sounds, I heard the pounding of great machines and the fires gobbling up oxygen beneath the street. As if I had eaten them from the air, fire and smoke poured into my stomach. Flames slipped up my throat and sealed the back of my mouth. In my mind, I saw myself taking the first quarter from my pocket, exchanging it for a ticket, pushing through the door and moving into the cool air. I saw myself holding out the ticket to be torn in half, going over an endless brown carpet toward the inner door. From the last row of seats on the other side of the inner door, inside the shadowy but not yet dark theater, a shapeless monster whose wet black mouth said, love me, stretched yearning arms toward me. Shock froze my shoes to the sidewalk, then shoved me firmly in the small of the back, and I was running down the block, unable to scream because I had to clamp my lips against the smoke and fire trying to explode from my mouth. The rest of that afternoon remains vague. I wandered through the streets, not in the clean, hollow way I had imagined, but almost blindly, hot and uncertain. I remember the taste of fire in my mouth and the loudness of my heart. After a time, I found myself before the elephant enclosure in the zoo. A newspaper reporter in a neat gray suit passed through the space before me, and I followed him, knowing that he carried a notebook in his pocket and that he had been beaten by gangsters, that he could locate the speaking secret that hid beneath the disconnected and dismembered pieces of the world. He would fire his pistol on an empty chamber and trick evil Solly Wellman, Barry Kroger, with his girlish, watchful eyes. And when Solly Wellman came gloating out of the shadow, the reporter would shoot him dead. Dead. Donna Reed smiled down from an upstairs window. Had there ever been a smile like that? Ever? I was in Chicago, and behind a closed door, Blackie Francho bled onto a brown carpet. Solly Wellman, something like Solly Wellman, called and called to me from the decorated grave where he lay like a secret. The man in the gray suit finally carried his notebook and his gun through a front door, and I saw that I was only a few blocks from home. Paul leans against the wire fence surrounding the playground, looking out, looking backward. Alan Ladd brushes off Leona, for she has no history that matters and exists only in the world of work and pleasure, of cigarettes and cocktail bars. Beneath this world is another, and Leona's life is a blind, strenuous denial of that other world. My mother held her hand to my forehead and declared that I not only had a fever, but had been building up to it all week. I was not to go to the playground that next day. I had to spend the day lying down on Mrs. Candy's couch. When she lifted the telephone to call one of the high school girls, I said not to bother. Other kids were gone all the time. And she put down the receiver. I lay on Mrs. Candy's couch, staring up at the ceiling of her darkened living room. The twins squabbled outside, and maternal, slow-witted Mrs. Candy brought me orange juice. The twins ran toward the sandbox, and Mrs. Candy groaned as she let herself fall into a wobbly lawn chair. The morning newspaper folded beneath the lawn chair said that The Hitchhiker and Double Cross had begun playing at the Orpheum Oriental. Chicago Deadline had done its work and traveled on. It had broken the world in half and sealed the monster deep within. Nobody but me knew this. Up and down the block, sprinklers whirred, whipping loops of water onto the dry lawns. Men driving slowly up and down the street hung their elbows out of their windows. For a moment, free of regret and nearly without emotion of any kind, I understood that I belonged utterly to myself. Like everything else, I had been torn asunder and glued back together with shock, vomit, and orange juice. The knowledge shifted into me that I was all alone. Stan, Jimmy, whatever his name was, would never come back to the theater. He would be afraid that I had told my parents and the police about him. I knew that I had killed him by forgetting him. And then I forgot him again. The next day I went back to the theater and went through the inner door and saw row after row of empty seats falling toward the curtained screen. I was all alone. The size and grandeur of the theater surprised me. I went down the long descending aisle and took the last seat, left side, on the broad middle aisle. The next row seemed nearly a playground's distance away. The lights dimmed, and the curtains rippled slowly away from the screen. Anticipatory music filled the air, and the first letters appeared on the screen. What I am, what I do, why I do it. I am simultaneously a man in his early 40s, that treacherous time, and a boy of 7 before whose bravery I shall forever fall short. I live underground in a wooden room, and patiently, in joyful concentration, decorate the walls. Before me, half unseen, hangs a large and appallingly complicated vision I must explore and memorize, must witness again and again in order to locate its hidden center. Around me, everything is in its proper place. My typewriter sits on the sturdy table. Beside the typewriter, a cigarette smolders, raising a gray stream of smoke. A record revolves on the turntable, and my small apartment is dense with music. Bird of Prey blues with Coleman Hawkins, Buck Clayton, and Hank Jones. Beyond my walls and windows is a world toward which I reach with outstretched arms and an ambitious and divided heart. As if Bird of Prey blues has evoked them, the voices of sentences to be written this afternoon, tomorrow, or next month stir and whisper, beginning to speak, and I lean over the typewriter toward them, getting as close as I can.
This is the end of disc number 3. Please continue listening on disc number 4.
And that is the end of our stories for tonight. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for being interested in stories and horror literature. Thank you for being cool and awesome. I highly encourage you guys to go back and re-listen to the VOD sometime. It's, I think, a lot easier to get into each of these stories if you're not distracted by a live chat. It's a lot of fun to hang out with everyone, obviously, but I think if you're really into the stories and you really want to be fully immersed and weirded out, a second listen with no chat is definitely the way to do it. I believe we will be doing this type of event sometime around the first weekend of every month from now on, so the next time will be somewhere near October 4th-ish. So look forward to that. I'll post more details on social medias and stuff when I know the definite details. All right, have a beautiful night, you guys. Hope you don't have scary dreams from all of these creepy stories. Okay, bye.
Duchess of the mom problems, matriarch of piss? I don't know. I hope I can one day make enough money to sponsor you both going to clown school.
Hello from the gutters of New York City, which are filled with dog manure, vomit, stale wine, urine, and blood. I am still here, like a spirit roaming the night, thirsty.
Hey yo, pump up the jam, it's the summer of Sam. I got a pen in my hand, scribbling a pentagram. I'm the founding forefather, Masonic book author. Midnight
surreal feeling about it. We're finally putting a face to horror and terror.